Chapter 342. Ahem, first of all, to celebrate the success of the clickbait title. Actually, the title of this miscellaneous article should be, Everything About CC Monthly Votes and Qing Yunyan. But I thought it was not sensational enough, so I changed it to this. I said a few days ago that I would write something to express my attitude and explain things when I have time. Everyone here is busy, and I think you don't want to see me being long-winded, so I immediately went into the main topic. First, about the CC incident. I hope that the debate about this matter will end. There is never a dish in this world that can satisfy everyone's preferences, and I admit that I don't have that ability. But I still want to clarify that I wrote this because the story needs it. Of course, there is no external interference and naturally I will not correct it. I think I am a very gentle person, but I have always been a little stubborn when it comes to writing stories. Please forgive me. Second, about the book review section, please maintain harmony. Discussion is fine, but personal attacks are not allowed. It's fine if you attack me, I have repeated it many times. Anyway, I am thick-skinned, right? It is a bit of a headache for the brothers and sisters who read the book to attack each other. We are all here to have fun, so why make it unpleasant? Regardless of support or opposition, I hope that everyone can express it in a more gentle manner. Of course, this matter has already faded, and it seems stupid and boring for me to bring it up again. But I have never had the chance to say it, and I always feel uncomfortable holding it in. Please forgive me. Third, I am personally against the practice of using other books as targets when commenting on a book. For example, if everyone likes this Qing Yunyan, it is my honor, but please do not attack other books and authors. From a moral point of view, this is not a good thing. From a moral point of view, as someone who works and earns money in this circle, I am also very afraid of offending people. Especially since I like to read books at Qidian, I am a loyal reader of many books. When I saw you criticize the people who read that book, I wanted to cry. I thought that it was indeed a good book. As for using other books to despise Qing Yunyan, although it is the freedom of the book review section, I have the right to be unhappy. Fourth, about the monthly votes. I have never expressed my attitude towards the monthly votes. Today I will take this opportunity to say, I like the monthly votes very much. The monthly votes represent honor and money. Any normal person will have a normal degree of vanity, and I am no exception. I like the monthly votes very much. Then why do I rarely solicit monthly votes? In the end, there are a few reasons. First, I don't think I write fast enough. If I get addicted to canvassing for votes, I'll be too happy to see my ranking climb up. I'll try my best to write, but if I write too much in a day, the quality will always decline. This is not a hypocritical statement, it is the truth. Everyone can see that whenever I write more than 7,000 words in a day, I always seem a little bloated, except for those chapters that are truly surging with ideas. Including the second chapter on the chrysanthemum sword and wine, which has more than 10,000 words. At the end of the chapter, I said that I was very proud, but an old friend in the Dragon Kong expressed his bewilderment, saying that this chapter is only so, why do I have to be proud? Actually, the reason was very simple. That day, I had written so many words in a chapter, but the quality was still maintained at an average level or above. That was why I was so pleased with myself. This also proved that it was difficult to maintain quality when the number of words increased. Second, the reason why I rarely solicit monthly votes is that I am very lazy, extremely lazy. This is not a hypocritical statement, I am indeed lazy. To look at the monthly votes every day and canvass for votes for me is very stressful. Third, sometimes I forget. I forget at the beginning of the month, and then I pretend to forget and sneak around until the end of the month or sometime when I find out that I'm still in the top 10. I am overjoyed and quickly canvass for votes again. In summary, I am really a bastard. Although I never object to authors adding votes when I read a book, I also know that some of my friends don't like to see these things, so I have a headache. If nothing else happened, perhaps I would continue like this until the end of the book. But a few days ago when I read Yi Ming, I found out that the author was actually canvassing for votes for me. I felt a little embarrassed. In the book review section, I also found out that some friends said, if you don't canvass for votes, your ranking won't go up, then wouldn't we have voted for you for nothing? In the VIP forum, I also saw a few of my old book friends constantly canvassing for votes for me. On Qidian, I found a book called New York Swordsman. The author actually gave Qing Yunyan a direct train, but I don't know the author at all. This feeling is really embarrassing. So, I want to make my attitude clear here. I like monthly votes like money. From next month onwards, on the 1st, the 15th, and the last day of every month, I will be canvassing for monthly votes. I won't explode, I won't add more chapters, I will just sincerely ask for votes. I don't expect any extravagant results, but I have to at least show the right attitude. This is a matter of the heart. Fifth, after talking about monthly votes, let's talk about Fan Xian, who I love and hate at the same time. What kind of person is Fan Xian? I now admit that what the fat tabby cat said makes sense. I have wrapped too much sugar around him, to the point that some readers mistakenly think that he is a good person. No, he is not a good person. After Caesar ended, I swore that I would never write a good person again. But, in reality, he really is a good person. Oh no, I'm going crazy. Actually, the outermost layer of Fan Xian's image is a layer of glittering paper clothing. Underneath the paper clothing is a very glaring mustard that makes people cry, underneath the mustard is a greasy sweet butter, and underneath the butter is a bitter poison shell. In the middle of the shell there is a smear of light. People are complicated. To the people of Qing they can only see his glittering appearance. To Fan Xian's enemies, they can see the spicy mustard underneath the golden clothing. To the emperor he seems to have discovered that Fan Xian is still sweet and nutritious butter. To Qin Pingping and Fan Jian, they think that the poison shell mixed with butter is the real Fan Xian. Haitang can't see what Fan Xian is, but she firmly believes that the core of Fan Xian is the light. Cici doesn't care what the young master is. She only knows that the young master in front of her is the god of light. Wanner and Fan Ruoruo don't care. They only know that Fan Xian is Fan Xian whether he is poison or butter. In fact, even Fan Xian doesn't know what kind of person he is. In the whole world only everyone and I know. This is a fact that we should be proud of. Don't expect Fan Xian to have a goal in life. Don't expect him to completely understand himself. Don't believe that he is a perfect person who takes every possible possibility into account. You will still be lost. As a man in his 30s, he has been pretending to be young for too long, and he has really entered puberty again. Who knows where the end lies? The Fan Xian of today loves glory, splendor, and wealth. He needs to satisfy his moral conscience. He looks forward to family and friendship. He likes beautiful women. In fact, looking back at ourselves, who can be sure what kind of goal we have in life? Fan Xian is like most of us. He muddles along and only looks at what is in front of him. He makes sure that every day is wonderful. This is the so-called happy life. Of course, some of his ideas are more stubborn than others. Because he is too afraid of death, he doesn't care about letting others die. Cold-bloodedness is formed in this way. Today I will continue recommending books. I don't believe in heresy. I don't know the authors of these 3 books, but I like them very much. The first is Magical Outfit. This book is well written. It's just that the scenes between the volumes are a bit fragmented. Overall it's great. I like 47. Let's go and assemble the little JJ. The second book is Helping Leisure Stories. As I think about the trip to Jiangnan, I read Helping Leisure Stories. It's very satisfying. I really don't know the author, but I really like that cute zither player. Especially when I read it, I realized that the author was also reading Qing Yu's Year. Suddenly I felt my face light up. The third book is Living in a Different World. I don't know how to fish, but I like watching him write about fishing. It makes me yearn for it. I want to go to Xinjiang and buy a small mud house to live in. I went to Baidu to search for gills, and only then did I find out that it means shrimp. I sincerely hope that the author will continue fishing to the end. Even in the future, when he has free time to open a bank or fight a war, I hope that Victor will not forget to take Her Majesty to the forest for SM bison. 7th, I have finished writing. I wish everyone good luck in their work and everything goes well. I wish everyone a harmonious family. The elders are in good health and the pregnant women are in a good mood. It's the weekend. Everyone should be happy. I bow and leave the stage. Chapter 343. In the dark night, the Peng family manor was silent. Not far away, the water of West Lake was gently rippling. Lights flickered in the garden. Because of the high wall separating them and the fact that the back of the mountain was their property, they did not have to worry about people noticing anything. The people who had traveled thousands of li to Jiangnan were all a bit tired. They had eaten well in Hangzhou. Full and warm, they felt sleepy. Before long, the lights gradually dimmed. Most of the people had sunk into sweet dreams. Only 2 rooms in the back of the garden still had lights on. One was a bedroom, the other was a study. In the bedroom, Cici dozed off while forcefully mending the sleeve Fan Xian had torn in Shazhou. She waited for him. In the study, Fan Xian sat in front of the table. His brows were slightly furrowed as he looked at the little book in the book. Haitang sat in the opposite corner. She was also holding a book in her hand. Her expression was serious. The handwriting on the book was fresh. It was clear that someone had just written it. After a long silence, the 2 of them raised their heads at the same time with great mutual understanding. They looked at each other for a long time with a bitter smile. In the end, it was Fan Xian who spoke first. Duo, it seems to be conflicting. Haitang shook her head. It's not that it seems, nor is it somewhat. These two martial methods are completely opposite. It is impossible to continue practicing them. At this moment, the two of them were holding a small booklet in their hands, which was an absolutely precious item in this world. Fan Xian was reading The Supreme Heart of Northern Qi's Tianyi Dao. Haitang was reading the first volume of the nameless martial secret that Fan Xian had copied from memory. The heart of Tianyi Dao was rumored to have been obtained by Ku He on the stone steps in front of the temple after kneeling for months. Although Fan Xian knew this was an absurd rumor after his night talk with Xiao An in the cave, the martial method itself was still a wondrous secret that all martial cultivators under heaven crazily pursued. Although Fan Xian's nameless martial secret was not very famous, it could turn a young man without an internal strength teacher into a 9th-level ace. It was tyrannical and ruthless, unparalleled in the world. Haitang knew its weight. When it came to sharing knowledge, Fan Xian was not stingy. Since Haitang had so generously brought over the heart of Tianyi Dao, he had to offer up his treasure. But the pair of young people studied it for a long time in the dark, and finally came to a somewhat depressing conclusion. The styles of the two cultivation methods were completely different. They were completely unrelated and vaguely clashed with each other. Fan Xian's tyrannical martial method was a straightforward and rough one. It focused on training the inner spirit and solidifying the meridians as the foundation. The most difficult part was the first hurdle. The powerful Jinqi that came out of nowhere burst forth from the back of the waist and caused a powerful shock to the cultivator's meridians. This was the so-called shaping. However, Haitang had practiced Tianyi Dao's martial method for over a dozen years. Her meridians had long been set in shape. No matter what, she could not disperse the power in her body and practice it anew. Furthermore, she could not be like Fan Xian and return to infancy and rely on the wisp of innate qi that had not completely dissipated in her body to forcefully endure it. She also did not have the precious mental experience of her previous life's myasthenia gravis. This first hurdle was impossible to cross. For Fan Xian, Tianyi Dao's martial method was also an ice beauty that could only be seen but not touched. This set of incantations was natural and responded to the yuanqi inside and outside of his body. It was indeed incomparably mysterious, particularly regarding the path and method of Jinqi flow in his body. It followed the path of gradual accumulation and was full of gentleness. The accumulated water droplets became rivers and used their moist power to cultivate the mind. However, the tyrannical martial method Fan Xian had practiced for over a dozen years had widened the meridians in his body to an unimaginable level. Even if he could use the martial method to condense his spirit into dew, for this dew to adhere to the walls of the entire meridians and form a trickle, it would take who knew how many years. The two of them looked at each other and sighed helplessly. Look more and comprehend by analogy. There will always be progress, Haitang said quietly. She and Fan Xian were both at the top of the younger generation, particularly as she had already entered the realm of the upper 9th level. However, she was still unable to touch the threshold of a breakthrough. That threshold seemed very close, but it was also illusory. She had thought that with Fan Xian's help, she might be able to gain some benefits. She had not thought that Fan Xian's Jinqi martial method would be such an abnormal existence. She couldn't help but feel slightly disappointed. Fan Xian replied, "However, it looks like you won't be able to use my method to reopen meridians. Putting aside the pain, I will not allow you to try this kind of danger." Haitang raised her brows and said in a clear voice, "I'm not a reckless woman." She then furrowed her brows and said, "Your martial method is indeed strange. How can there be such a strange cultivation method in the world that harms yourself first and then others? Probably only a strange creature like you can practice it." Fan Xian remembered what Uncle Wu Zhu had said before. He shook his head and said, "That's not necessarily true. Based on what I know, there have been people who have practiced it before." "Who taught you this heart?" Haitang asked probingly. She didn't expect Fan Xian to answer her. Unexpectedly, Fan Xian was frank. "My mother left it to me." "The young lady of the Yi family?" "Yes." Haitang smiled bitterly. "The world hides many treasures but doesn't dare to reveal them. It is rare to see people like you and me fooling around. With two books like this in front of us, I'm afraid it is also a rare sight in the world. Unfortunately, there is no result." Fan Xian's expression also darkened slightly. From ancient times until now, the only people who dared to share their wealth without the selfishness of their sex were probably him and Haitang, this strange pair of young man and woman. This should have been the sharing of knowledge in this world and the beautiful scene of leaving their names in history, but he suddenly flipped to a page. A smile suddenly appeared in his eyes. Don't be in such a hurry to sigh. Isn't there a method of dual cultivation written here? Haitang furrowed her brows and said, dual cultivation of life and death. What is life? Those who follow the heavens are known as fate. Those who follow the self are known as nature. With the mind as nature and the heart as life, if the mind is not guarded internally, then the nature will be shaken by the heart. If the heart is not fixed internally, then the life will be stolen by sound and beauty. If the emotion does not die and the path does not change, then the return is known as the opposite. It is written clearly here, but how did you practice it? You spend all your time in officialdom. How could you find the realm of sound and beauty? The heart is far and the ground is biased. Fan Xian used a line from Tao Yuanming's poem to answer her question. Haitang's eyes lit up. Immediately after, she smiled calmly and said, there is still one big problem. Unless you rebuild your meridians, given the rough Jinqi in your body and the little bit of new Jinqi, you will not be able to survive. Are you willing to shatter your meridians with your powerful Jinqi and start from the beginning? Fan Xian didn't answer this question. Instead, he turned to ask about a few difficult parts of the heart of Tianyi Dao. Haitang pointed out each one carefully and did not hide anything. Haitang thought that although she could not practice the tyrannical martial method, if she could memorize this martial method and pass it on to the descendants of Tianyi Dao in the future, it would be a great fortune for the people of her country. Thus, she also read attentively. Occasionally there was something she did not understand. Of course, she was not ashamed to ask. Fan Xian was like her. He spoke openly and honestly. The red candles were in the room and the stars were in the sky. The two of them were classmates, happy and harmonious. Gradually, the two of them began to immerse themselves in the mysterious realm contained in the two martial methods. Although they did not physically walk, they already felt it in their hearts. They no longer asked questions. Instead, they each sat with their backs to each other and quickly memorized the contents of the books. After an indeterminable amount of time, Fan Xian, who had his back turned the entire time, suddenly faintly said, actually, after the assassination in the Hanging Temple, my Jinqi exploded through my meridians and flowed through my body. Up until today it has not been pulled back. Haitang still had her back turned to him. However, her shoulders trembled slightly. A moment later, she quietly replied, you're finally willing to admit it. The affairs of the world were always so mysterious. Originally, Fan Xian would not have destroyed his meridians to practice the heart of Tianyi Dao again. However, his meridians were already damaged beyond repair. It was perfect for him to practice. Yet, Haitang was still unable to gain any benefit from it. Comparing the two, in the end, Fan Xian had gained a great advantage. He had wanted to continue hiding it, but the two of them had their backs to each other for a long time. The uncomfortable feeling in his heart grew stronger and stronger. After some thought, he finally spoke with sincerity. Fan Xian didn't turn around and continued, I can't hide it from you for too long. Furthermore, I guessed that when the rumors of my past reached the north, you had already taken this martial method to the south. You hid it from Imperial Advisor Ku He, right? Haitang made a sound of agreement. Fan Xian was moved but also wary. Furrowing his brows, he asked, why? Haitang's patterned jacket bloomed like a flower in a painting under the faint yellow light. It's very simple. I guess that something must have happened to you. Otherwise, no matter how shameless you were, you wouldn't have asked me for the heart in a letter. Even an idiot would have guessed that this kind of thing is the secret of a country. How could I give it to you? Since you have something, of course I want to help you resolve it. After all, the agreement between us still has many years to go. Fan Xian paused slightly and then asked, then what do I do now? Originally, I was unable to practice your heart. Now that my meridians are all destroyed, I can use the heart of Tianyi Dao to rebuild my foundation and roots. What I gave you is of no use to you. Haitang calmly replied, it's useless to me, but it will be useful to people in the future. I trust that you won't mind me passing it on to my descendants. Your descendants? Is it possible that something will happen between me and them? The knot in Fan Xian's heart gradually disappeared. He laughed loudly and took advantage of the girl's words. It was like Haitang didn't understand this dirty joke and coldly said, seeing that you've been sufficiently honest with me, I won't quibble. Fan Xian smiled and turned around. Waving the book in his hand, he shamelessly said, in any case, the thing is in my hands. Am I afraid you'll go back on your word? Haitang also turned around at this moment. She stood up and walked to his side. Fan Xian thought she was truly angry and quickly hid the book in his clothes. Haitang looked at this person and her emotions were in a mess. She thought to herself that this person was so young and already held great power in his hands. He was skilled in both literature and martial arts. In front of outsiders he always appeared warm and sinister. Why was it that every time she looked at him, he always seemed like a scoundrel in the marketplace? She said unhappily, "I'm changing a few sentences for you. Teacher has tampered with them. If you continue to practice according to them, I won't care if you become an idiot." Fan Xian was surprised. He took out the book and stared blankly for a long time. He didn't feel the slightest hindrance in the heart he had read earlier. He couldn't help but admire Ku He's realm. Even a fake could be created so beautifully. But immediately after he became angry. He thought that old bald donkey was indeed sinister. If he hadn't used the wondrous method of memorizing everything in one word to kill his female disciple, he really wouldn't know how he would die in the future. "Are you going to make me an idiot from the beginning?" Fan Xian looked at Haitang and said angrily. Haitang calmly said, "What you and I are doing is absurd. If it gets out, I'm afraid it will shock the world. What if I'm not careful? The key is that you and I must be honest. If you hide anything, I won't dare to trust you. If you didn't admit to me earlier that you had lost all your Jinqi, becoming an idiot would be your own fault." Fan Xian was shocked. He thought that being a good person indeed had its rewards. After Haitang had changed a few words in the key sentences, Fan Xian picked it up and looked at it again. Immediately, he felt that it was like a beautiful painting that had been smeared by a master painter. Immediately the entire painting brightened, and the landscape and people in the painting immediately came to life. Fan Xian knew that this was the true face of the heart of Tianyi Dao. His heart trembled. He knew that if he continued to practice like this, it wouldn't be long before he would be able to walk the path of being one with nature and naturally repair the damaged meridians in his body. The realm that had left him for too long was finally coming back. Thinking of this, even someone as persevering as him couldn't help but feel emotional. Suddenly, his heart jumped and he thought of something. "In a bit, I'll draw a few pictures for you." He looked at Haitang and said shamelessly, "The tyrannical martial method I gave you should be used to practice the Jinqi routes on the diagram. If you practice it blindly, you might end up with a dozen bloody holes in your body when you enter the next stage." Haitang stared at him in a daze. A moment later she faintly said, "When will the people in this world be less scheming and deceitful, at least between you and me?" Fan Xian fell silent and then said, "I will study hard in the future. Of course you also need to study." After a long time, the two of them broke away from this awkward silence. Perhaps to lighten the mood, Haitang quietly said, "I've come to see your injury." Fan Xian nodded silently. Although the technique of introspection was subtle, sometimes it was always a bystander who saw things more clearly. Particularly for someone at Haitang's realm, it was easier for her to find where the problem was. With her profound knowledge, she could suggest a corresponding solution. Haitang walked to his back. He didn't see her move her qi, but her right hand naturally pressed against the human point on Fan Xian's back. A gust of wind rose without reason in the study. The light on the table flickered. Suddenly, a gentle ripple of power appeared in the air. Haitang closed her eyes and carefully sent the Jinqi in her body into Fan Xian's body to examine his injury. At this moment, the surroundings suddenly quieted down. There wasn't a trace of wind. The flame on the lamp rose straight up. The air seemed to have frozen, but it was not sticky. On the contrary, it carried a clear feeling. The Jinqi in the body of a superior 9th level ace leaked out. In an instant, it perfectly harmonized with the surroundings. The Tianyi Dao sect's method of following nature was indeed wondrous. After a long time, Haitang furrowed her brows with her eyes closed. It was as if she had encountered something strange. At this moment, Fan Xian did not feel anything. He only felt that his whole body was comfortably warm and very comfortable. After a fresh Jinqi spread behind his waist, it quickly spread throughout his body. It was like taking a wooden bath or sunbathing in Hawaii. His whole body was extremely relaxed, and it seemed that he was about to fall asleep. Suddenly, he heard the girl behind him make a light sound. Fan Xian didn't even think. Without opening his eyes, he yawned and asked, "What is it?" "Nothing." Haitang furrowed her brows. "Don't fall asleep. Oh, Tianyi Dao is indeed powerful. You can talk while treating illness." Fan Xian smiled. "However, if this counts as treating injuries, then I'm willing to be injured every day. It's more comfortable than horse slaughter." "Can you shut your mouth?" Haitang asked calmly. "Otherwise, I can't guarantee that my mind won't become confused and suddenly increase my strength." Fan Xian heard the girl's threat but was not afraid at all. Rascally, he said, "Do you want to murder your husband?" Two muffled grunts came from their mouths at the same time. The air in the study suddenly exploded. Countless swirls of air left their bodies and disappeared in an instant. They swept up the books collected by the previous Prime Minister Lin Ruofu into the air. Papers flew everywhere. It was a wretched sight. Neither Fan Xian nor Hai Tang were injured, but Fan Xian sat on the pile of papers on the floor and looked with lingering fear at the girl gently stroking her hair. In a trembling voice he said, "I really want to kill someone." Hai Tang stared into his eyes and forcefully suppressed her anger. Calmly she said, "I said before, don't disturb my state of mind at this time." Fan Xian was speechless. In his heart he cursed, "Then why didn't you say it clearly first? I thought you liked to work and flirt at the same time." Hai Tang calmed her slightly panting chest. The gaze she looked at Fan Xian with became strange. Although the Jinqi is scattered within your internal organs, the Jinqi accumulated at the snow mountain behind your waist is still very powerful. Furthermore, the degree of ruthlessness is even more terrifying than when we fought last time. Presently there are no meridians circulating. It can only accumulate and become thicker. She shook her head and said, "Fortunately I came in time. Otherwise, in another half a year, once the vital part of your snow mountain exploded, it would truly be over." Fan Xian had two teachers in his life. One was Uncle Wu Zhu and the other was Fei Jia. One taught him how to cut carrots and the other taught him how to use poisons. In terms of Jinqi cultivation he had always been self-taught. Thus, in terms of his knowledge of the finer details of Jinqi methods, he was much worse than the people of the mysterious sections. Thus, he had never discovered the greatest danger he faced. Hearing Hai Tang speak of it now, only now did he know that he had been in danger a few days ago. He couldn't help feeling a lingering fear. He furrowed his brows and said, "Ever since the Hanging Temple incident I stopped cultivating. Why would there be more and more in the snow mountain?" Hai Tang thought for a moment and then said, "It's probably because you've been cultivating since a young age and have already developed a habit, so even when you're sleeping?" Fan Xian raised his right arm and didn't let her continue. He shook his head and said, "That's the reason." For Fan Xian, meditation and sleeping were an entertainment life that had merged into one since a young age. If it were any other cultivator they would certainly be envious of him. Now it had become a very dangerous reason. No one knew what he was thinking. His expression was slightly dark. In a cold voice he said, "I don't understand. Sir Fei also doesn't understand. Can't Eunuch Hong see it?" Hai Tang didn't know that he had already begun to suspect a certain noble person and didn't understand. Fan Xian shook his head and said, "It's nothing, thank you for your trouble." At this moment the room was a mess. Pieces of paper were flying everywhere. Fan Xian didn't dare let the servants do the work. He and Hai Tang cleaned up a bit. The two precious heart manuals were put back into their clothes by the two of them. As for the messy pieces of paper under the desk, they didn't bother with them. "I'll start practicing tomorrow," Fan Xian said sincerely. "I've taken advantage of you in this matter, but I'll have to trouble Duo to stand guard for me this month." Hai Tang didn't mind temporarily acting as his bodyguard. She gently nodded and suddenly asked, "And Ji, tell me the truth. The black-clothed man my brother disciple met in front of the precipice in Shangjing Mountain, was it you?" Fan Xian fell silent. He knew that Hai Tang had finally confirmed that the nature of the ruthless Jinqi in his body was very similar to the one Lang Tiao had encountered. However, that matter had to do with Xiaoan in the temple. It was too big. After a moment he replied seriously, "Actually, when you went to the embassy to find me that morning, you probably guessed something. However, you also know that I will never admit to anything." "Teacher should have guessed some things," Hai Tang smiled slightly. "But you don't need to be too nervous. He said that in the past your mother once did him a favor." Fan Xian smiled coldly and said, "Giving me a fake heart is considered repaying a favor? Although the heart earlier was fake, it didn't do any harm. Furthermore, this was a decision teacher had no choice but to make after he heard that you were the son of the Qing Emperor," Hai Tang said seriously. "This heart technique is the supreme secret of our sect. I ask that you take care of it, Master Fan." Fan Xian pointed at his own head and said, "Take it back later. Destroy it or whatever. I've already remembered it." Hai Tang frowned. She was surprised at his abnormal memory. She wondered who had taught this little monster when he was young. Thinking of other things, her heart jumped. She said sincerely, "I heard teacher say that you have a blind grandmaster at your side. I wonder if I have the opportunity to meet him in person?" As the pride of a generation of martial arts, she was most interested in the blind man who could injure Grandmaster Ku He without any false reputation. She asked purely because she wanted to meet Wu Zhu as a junior and ask for his guidance. Fan Xian shook his head and smiled bitterly. "I've discovered that it is difficult to keep any secrets in front of Imperial Advisor Ku He. Unfortunately, You won't be able to see my uncle in the near future. I don't know what happened to him these past few years, but he has fallen in love with Yi Liuyan's ways and likes to travel alone. Haitang was a bit disappointed. And Ji, although teacher did not say it clearly to me, his words revealed some information. Your mother should have some connection to the temple. That day when she and Ku He spoke, they had not spoken of this matter, but Ku He had mentioned Xiao En and some clues. As intelligent as she was, she had naturally guessed some of it. Fan Xian shook his head and said resolutely and decisively, the temple is too far away. Let's talk about worldly affairs first. Haitang was slightly angry. She hated Fan Xian's particularly vile nature even more. She said coldly, what worldly affairs? Fan Xian chuckled. For example, Duoduo, how old are you this year? We've known each other for so long and we've written many letters. I don't even know this most important question. I very sincerely ask everyone to vote for me. This is the beginning of the month. Everyone should have a guaranteed vote in their hands. Then hurry up and vote for me. What are you waiting for? If you don't, I'll have the eldest princess bite you. To be continued. If you want to know what happens next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support genuine reading. Chapter 344. At the beginning of the 6th year of the Qing calendar, regardless of whether it was Northern Qi or the Qing kingdom, many miraculous things happened within the borders of both countries. Due to the cold weather, no grains had yet grown in the paddy fields, so naturally, there were no double ears of grain. There were no white fish in the rivers and there were no chilants in the mountains. However, when Wuzhou was opening up the mountains, they dug out a pair of copper walls. When Shazhou was repairing the dikes, the workers were pleasantly surprised to find an incomparably large turtle with cloud patterns on it. In the paddy fields of Jiangnan, there were birds and red geese soaring in the sky. Regardless of whether it was copper walls or cloud turtles and birds, they were all auspicious signs. The officials of various places hurriedly submitted reports and fawned over them. However, the emperor in Jingdo was somewhat dismissive. This shameless and auspicious trend had arisen within northern Qi last year. The earliest legend was that after the first snowfall in Qi Mountain, a woodcutter on the mountain found a white deer, white wolf, and white fox. He thought it was an auspicious sign and submitted a report to the northern Qi emperor. The great Grandmaster Ku He took this as an auspicious sign from heaven. He believed that the rulers of each country had governed appropriately and conformed to the will of heaven. Thus, he reopened the monastery and took in a female disciple in a temple outside Shangjing. This female disciple was Si Lily, who later entered the royal palace. Later this trend spread to the south. Similar things also began to appear in various parts of the Qing kingdom. However, the Qing emperor was clearly a tough person who did not respect ghosts and gods. It was not until a few days ago, when the imperial astronomer reported with wild joy in a trembling voice that the imperial astronomer had seen stars and auspicious clouds, that the Qing emperor began to look at this reality squarely. Auspicious signs were also known as auspicious signs. They were passed down from ancient times and often noted in scriptures. They were little magic that the heavens expressed their satisfaction with those who governed the world. This was a transmission of the will of heaven. The people of the world believed in it greatly. There were many types of auspicious signs, such as favorable weather, double ears of rice, springs from the ground, and so on. Auspicious signs were divided into 5 levels. Other than the Qilin, which could not be found and was classified as auspicious, the other levels were great auspicious, upper auspicious, middle auspicious, and lower auspicious. The white wolf and white fox were upper auspicious. The birds and red geese were lower auspicious. The so-called stars and auspicious clouds, in the imperial astronomer's joyous report, were the colorful clouds in the sky. This was truly a great auspicious sign. Furthermore, the name of the Qing kingdom was embedded in it. No matter how reserved and suspicious the Qing emperor was, he seemed to begin to feel elated. After all, the emperor was also a person and always liked being flattered. It must be a good year for the weather. Since it was a good year, there could be no war. Using the auspicious signs as a summons, the exchanges of state affairs between northern Qi and the Qing kingdom became closer, particularly since the two countries were about to unite by marriage. The great prince and the great duke of northern Qi were about to consummate their marriage. Northern Qi sent out a large number of diplomatic groups. What shocked the people of Qing was that the imperial advisor of northern Qi, Ku He, had followed the envoy south to be a witness to the wedding. Great Grandmaster Ku He's position in the world was very high. Not only was he one of the top great grandmasters, But Tianidao also faintly affected the temples in various places and the ascetic monks walking around. Although the temple never interfered in worldly affairs, this kind of hidden prestige had long surpassed the influence of someone at the peak of martial arts. Thus, although the people of Qing were proud and glorious, all kinds of reception arrangements had to be made anew. Yi Luyun and Yi He were nowhere to be found. It seemed that the only person who could receive them was the Emperor of Qing. But for the Emperor to personally come out, the officials of the office of the Grand Herald of Qing did not have the courage. In the end, it was the Empress Dowager who could not bear to see the officials panic and came out to settle the matter. She still followed Master Zhuang Mohan's rules and invited Ku He into the palace. She would be responsible for receiving him. Unexpectedly, when Imperial Advisor Ku He arrived in Jingdo, he politely declined the invitation and moved into the Qing temple himself. This was in line with his status. After all, he was a great grandmaster. Although the two countries were different, the people of Qing still showed enough respect. Aside from the respect was curiosity. The people of the world speculated that although the marriage between the two countries was a big matter, it should not have alarmed him, right? A few days after the Northern Qi diplomatic group entered the capital, Ku He's true purpose of personally going to the Qing court seemed to be revealed. It turned out that the Emperor of Northern Qi had personally written a letter stating that he was willing to mend relations with the Qing kingdom and extend the agreement drafted last year for 10,000 years. The two countries would refer to each other as brothers regardless of seniority. They would only talk about new friendships and be friends for generations to come. Such an important negotiation needed Ku He to personally oversee it. The Emperor of Qing held the letter from his northern colleague in his hand and muttered to himself for a few days. In the end, he gently nodded his head. He was probably giving Ku He some face. When the news came out, the world rejoiced. Even though the people of Qing revered martial arts, they still liked peaceful days. However, the military was faintly angry. They felt that the court was powerful and this was a great opportunity to unify the world. Why put a few pieces of paper over their heads? Although it was not heavy, it made it difficult to breathe. However, the leader of the military of the old Qin family understood the affairs of the world and did not care. He only occasionally said to the people closest to him, "Now that Northern Qi is recovering at an unexpected speed, it will be difficult to use troops in the next few years. This agreement is just a few pieces of paper. When the time comes, we can tear it up. It's not like His Majesty hasn't done such things before." However, Ku He's other goal in coming south to Jingdo made all of the Jingdo officials and commoners drop their glasses. He wanted to take Minister Fan's only daughter, the young lady of the Fan family, as a disciple. Imperial Advisor Ku He's reason was sufficient. He said that a few months before and after the years Yin and Yang intersected, auspicious signs descended from the heavens. It was a feeling of heaven's benevolence. Tianidao adhered to the theory of the unity of heaven and man. Acting according to heaven's will, he chose a prodigy of the world to carefully cultivate and work for the good of the people. Since it was an act of obeying heaven, it was not limited by land. Northern Qi had an auspicious sign, so he took one disciple. The Qin kingdom's auspicious sign had appeared, so he had to take another disciple. Thus he had personally come to Jingdo. The news of Tianidao Grandmaster Ku He reopening the monastery had already spread throughout the world last year, but the Qin people had never thought that this matter would have anything to do with them. Who would have thought that the last female disciple of Tianidao would end up in Jingdo? As for why he had chosen the young lady of the Fan family, that became a question in everyone's minds. Not many people would connect it to Fan Xian far away in Jiangnan. After all, no matter how arrogant and powerful Fan Xian was, he had no power to order Imperial Advisor Ku He to work for his own good. Ku He did not explain his criteria for choosing a disciple. It was only through rumors spread by some eunuchs responsible for serving him that people learned that Imperial Advisor Ku He had once traveled among the people of Jingdo and stood silently in front of the Imperial Academy of Medicine for half a day. Afterward, he had a warm expression of admiration and said that a certain girl in the hospital had a kind, pure, and intelligent nature. That day, Fan Ruoruo was interning in the Imperial Academy of Medicine. Using the nursing knowledge and medical skills she had learned over the past few months, she carefully took care of the critically ill patients in the hospital. She did not take off her clothes, her lips were slightly dry, and her winter clothes were drenched in sweat. It was very tiring. In this world there was a saying, "Civil and martial arts have no borders." Northern Qi's Zhuang Mohan students were all high-ranking officials in the Qing kingdom. If Northern Qi's Imperial Advisor Ku He wanted to take a Qing person as a disciple, the Qing people would only feel honored and would not feel anything else. Thus, the people did not have much of a reaction. On the contrary, they were happy to see it succeed. However, Kuhi taking a disciple was a major event. Furthermore, it was the young lady of an official's family. Naturally, he had to ask for the opinion of the elders in her family. Even Fan Jian did not dare to make a decision on this matter. He had to enter the palace to ask for the emperor's edict. Among the layers of palaces, the Qing emperor sat on the dragon chair and furrowed his brows slightly. After a long silence, he only asked, "Doesn't Ji dislike Hongqing that much?" Fan Jian was frightened and didn't know what to say. A glimmer of a smile flashed through the emperor's eyes, but he was also shocked at Fan Xian's long limbs and great power. He also felt that Kuhi loved that girl called Haitang too much and was not enough to cause trouble. In addition, he had exiled Fan Xian to Jiangnan, so he felt somewhat guilty. So he waved his hand and allowed this proposal. Not long after the great prince's marriage, Kuhi left behind the diplomatic group and took Fan Ruoruo with him as he floated away from the capital. Thus, the marriage between the Fan family and King Jing's family was pushed back indefinitely. They could only wait and see when it would truly disappear. King Jing's heir, Li Hongqing, was originally under house arrest. Suddenly hearing the grievous news, he almost vomited blood. After King Jing learned of this matter, he entered the palace and made a great ruckus. In the end, it provoked the Empress Dowager to come out and pacify him. After King Jing returned to his manor, he could not swallow this anger. He led a group of gardeners and thugs in his manor and charged straight to Minister Fan's manor, which he had been on good terms with for generations. Regardless of whether it was the front or back manor, they smashed everything in a mess, turning the entire Fan manor into a dilapidated garbage dump. They destroyed countless antiques that Fan Jian had treasured for many years and chased the Fan manor servant girls until their faces paled. In the end, King Jing gave Minister Fan, who had rushed back to his manor, a fierce punch in the eye and left a black mark. Only then did he arrogantly lead his troops back to his manor, slightly relieving the anger in his chest. By West Lake in Jiangnan, there were no lotuses in the beginning of spring, and a fine rain fell like a thread. Fan Xian and his group had already lived in Hangzhou for almost a month. Although it was called a vacation, there was a deeper meaning for him to stay like this in Jiangnan, where spring was about to arrive. During these days, the Jiangnan branch of the Overwatch Council began to operate at full power. It was no longer like before, where all matters had to be handled through Jingdo. Instead, they were sent directly to the manor by West Lake. This manor had become the second center of power in the Overwatch Council other than the main courtyard in Jingdo. As for the situation of the Jiangnan Road officials, the details of the Ming family and the salt merchants, as well as the movements of the palace treasury in recent months, they were all summarized by the 4th Bureau official sitting in the manor and then reported to Fan Xian. Without the geographical distance, the upper echelons of the Overwatch Council increased their control over Jiangnan. However, because the Ming family had reacted very quickly and had already begun to make arrangements as early as last autumn, the Ming family was also a large local family. The people they used were all family members, so the level of the spies they planted in the council was not high enough and they did not obtain much useful information. On the contrary, the Jiangnan water bandits subdued in Shazhou began to display an unexpected use for Fan Xian. Xia Qifei was a person with deep foresight and had long wanted to take back the Ming family. He had prepared for many years, so he had a much more detailed grasp of the Ming family's shipping channels and related information than the Overwatch Council. The Ming family had been strangely quiet. They only heard that there had been a gathering of the upper echelons in Suzhou. It was clearly aimed at Fan Xian's arrival. However, that gathering was very secretive, and the Overwatch Council did not find any news. Given Fan Xian's identity and status, in addition to the fact that he was disciplining the third prince in name, no one, regardless of whether it was the Ming family or the many officials of Jiangnan Road, dared to be the first to provoke him. As for Yun Jilan and the others in Dongyi, they had only come to support the Ming family. Who would have thought that Fan Xian would so unreasonably launch a dog chase operation? An immortal living in the mortal world could perhaps hide in the marketplace for a long time, but a group of immortals, no matter what, could not completely hide their tracks. The Peng Manor, which no one lived in for many years, suddenly had more people living in it. Regardless of whether it was the purchase of food, fruits and vegetables, or the expensive daily necessities entering the manor, all of this fell into the eyes of the observant people in Hangzhou. Thus, after a dozen days, the news that Commissioner Fan was in Hangzhou had spread like wildfire and spread throughout all of Jiangnan Road. However, he hid in the manor and did not see guests. The Hangzhou Zhizhou came once and was politely and firmly denied by the gatekeeper. Everyone knew that Commissioner Fan was still on vacation and did not want to be disturbed. However, everyone was guessing what exactly Fan Xian was preparing for after being quiet for so long. He was quiet, and the people on the Jianghu were also forced to be quiet. The number of people giving gifts to the big ship on the river did not decrease. The Ming family also respectfully and obediently moved out of a few other manors by West Lake, terrified of disturbing the commissioner's peace. The manor by West Lake was quiet, but it attracted the gazes of countless people. A small boat floated on the lake. Two scholarly-looking young men were sitting at the head and tail of the boat. In the middle was a short table. On it were fresh fruits and vegetables and Jiangnan water wine. It was very elegant and at ease. The two of them were Fan Xian and Hai Tang after their disguises. The two of them did not smear any flour or anything like that on their faces. They only had Fan Xian skillfully pick at the corners of their eyebrows and then use a rubber hand to slightly raise the ends of their eyebrows. Once the eyebrows changed, the two of them immediately changed a lot. If one was not familiar with them, they would not be able to recognize them. At this time, the small boat was slowly moving in a remote corner of West Lake. After the first break of the rain, the air on the lake was very fresh. Recently, Fan Xian often went boating with Hai Tang on the lake. On one hand, he liked the scenery of the lake and mountains. On the other hand, Fan Xian was beginning to learn the heart of Tianyi Dao. According to Hai Tang, he had to be close to nature at all times and use the yuanqi of heaven and earth to repair the damaged meridians in his body. After Fan Xian practiced the heart of Tianyi Dao, he no longer gathered his jinqi in the snowy mountains. Instead, he moved it to his dantian. The jinqi that had accumulated bit by bit seemed to carry a fresh scent and slowly spread out in the walls of his meridians, moistening his withered and damaged meridians. Being on West Lake and close to the beautiful natural scenery, with the slightly cool lake water reflecting the white clouds and blue sky, and the sparse forest at the foot of the mountain to his side, the cultivation of the heart was indeed much faster. Fan Xian believed what Hai Tang said was reasonable, but he knew the more important reason was that his jinqi cycle had one more cycle than other martial cultivators. In the past he had practiced too much of it. In the past he had only used it on rock climbing. Only now did he know that it was of great benefit to his mind's connection to heaven and earth. He closed his eyes and half reclined at the head of the boat. His right hand, intentionally or unintentionally, rested on the side of the boat. His fingertips seemed to touch the slightly rippling surface of the lake, and a faint, almost imperceptible jinqi slowly seeped out from his fingertips. Once it touched the lake water, it gently withdrew and flowed into his body, causing fine ripples to appear on the lake water where his fingertips touched. Hai Tang gently rowed the two oars. A pair of eyes as bright as the lake water watched Fan Xian's fingertips. She furrowed her brows slightly and silently sighed. She thought to herself that the young man in front of her had a rare level of comprehension and luck. Like the scene in front of her, the jinqi leaving his body and being tainted by the breath of nature, was clearly a sign of the third level of the heart of Tianyi Dao. Although she was known as a genius, it had taken her 5 years of practice to reach this level. Fan Xian, it had only been a dozen days. Although Fan Xian's current realm was much higher than when she had first entered the sect and his ability to comprehend was also much stronger, the speed of his progress still made Hai Tang feel a glimmer of disbelief and alarm. Fan Xian now had both the north and the south, and he held great power in his hands. He also had a good reputation among the people. If such a person walked the evil path in the future, who would be able to control him? In reality, Fan Xian's ability to comprehend martial arts was far from Hai Tang's. The reason he was able to practice the heart of Tianyi Dao so smoothly was partly because Hai Tang had taught him without holding anything back. Partly, it was because Fan Xian's jinqi foundation was very solid when he was young. The third point was mentioned earlier. Fan Xian was very familiar with this method of jinqi leaving and then returning. He was a stingy person, but it just so happened that he catered to the cultivation method of Tianyi Dao. Seeming to sense what Hai Tang was thinking, Fan Xian woke up from his meditation and slowly opened his eyes. He gazed at Hai Tang with a not quite there smile and said, "Don't worry. If I really wanted to break the agreement, I wouldn't have let the northern Qi person you brought to Jiangnan come into contact with so many things." In his agreement with Hai Tang, or more accurately, the agreement between Fan Xian and the northern Qi royal family, after the eldest princess fall, the goods smuggled by the palace treasury to the north would not decrease. Furthermore, there would be a great increase in quality and level. Fan Xian had even agreed to the northern Qi people's requests for certain goods that were strictly prohibited from leaving the country. Miraculously, the northern Qi person Hai Tang brought to Jiangnan was an official of the northern Qi court. As the head of the Ministry of Revenue, he also held the post of the Ministry of Works Director. At the beginning, he had risen and fallen in the Ministry of War for a period of time. This official's career had not improved, but he was a talented and capable person. He could calculate accounts, knew the structure of weapons, and was skilled in inspecting goods. Haitang bringing him here to be responsible for the transaction with the Qing Palace Treasury was truly a very appropriate choice. I am a person who takes promises very seriously. Fan Xian gazed at Haitang and said, I will certainly do what I promised you in Shangjing. We are the same. Haitang smiled slightly and let go of the oar handle, allowing the little boat to float on the lake without an owner. She said, You should have received the news that teacher has already taken the young lady of the Fan family and left Jingdo. Without waiting for Fan Xian to speak, she continued, Fan Xijia has already begun to gradually take over the businesses the Chui family left within our borders. You should know that if the emperor had not nodded his head, these should have been taken into the national treasury and not become your private property. Fan Xian shook his head and said, The Chui family has always been a citizen of the Qing kingdom. Even if he committed a crime and was caught, it should still be taken over by the Qing people. Haitang ignored his sophistry and continued, Furthermore, I have brought the heart to you as you said. I think there is nothing for either of us to be picky about in the contents of the first part of the agreement. Fan Xian nodded. This was a transaction that was beneficial to both sides. However, he didn't know why he trusted the northern Qi people so much. Haitang also didn't seem to understand this point. Furrowing her brows, she said, And Ji, you sent your sister and brother to Shangjing. Don't say it was unintentional. Why is that? Fan Xian smiled. He knew that she had finally sensed something was wrong, but he could not directly answer her. Did he have to tell a foreigner that he was worried that one day the emperor would suddenly make a move to reshuffle the cards, so he had to leave some backup plans in the other countries under heaven? He waved his hand and said, This is nothing. As long as our agreement continues to be carried out, I trust that regardless of whether it is you or that little emperor, both will protect my family well. Haitang raised her brows and said, If the matter is exposed, how will you face everyone in the Qing kingdom? Face? I won't have the face to face them, Fan Xian said with a smile. Although I don't think of myself as a traitor, people will certainly think of me as the biggest traitor of the Qing kingdom. Haitang smiled and had no words to say against his frank and ruffian nature. Fan Xian continued to smile and said, Besides, for this world, I don't mind being an internationalist. The auspicious signs in various parts of the Qing kingdom were tampered with by you? Haitang lowered her head and asked. Fan Xian did not deny it. The matters in Wuzhou and Shazhou were done by the Overwatch Council. As for the stars and auspicious clouds observed by the imperial astronomer, don't forget, the previous imperial astronomer was the second prince's man. He had already been invited by the Overwatch Council for tea on a dark and windy night. Until now he had not been released. The present imperial astronomer's relationship with Fan Xian was hard to fathom. He thought to himself, the little emperor of northern Qi is in the north doing three white things. There are few wild beasts on the snowy mountains here, but when the auspicious clouds come out, they will always be able to suppress you. In the secret letter from the emperor, it was clear that he was very satisfied with his arrangements. A sense of pride seeped through the lines. The emperor of the Qing kingdom. Haitang deliberated over her words. Although he has rarely appeared these years, everyone knows that the emperor is a genius, particularly since teacher has taken your sister as his last disciple. It's hard to say that he won't guess something. Fan Xian nodded. These things cannot be hidden from the emperor. As an official, I will not hide it. I have long written a secret memorial and presented it to him. Haitang was slightly surprised and said, You are quite open and candid. Then is there anything you won't say? Fan Xian furrowed his brows and said seriously, For example, moving the silver of the palace treasury into my own home. Of course, I would be too embarrassed to tell the emperor about such a thing. The little boat once again sank into silence, and the lake water once again became quiet. Fan Xian looked at the slightly worried Haitang and found that after half a year, this girl's temperament seemed to have changed slightly. Perhaps it was because she was new to the matters of court politics that it had a slight effect on her state of mind. Facing Haitang, Fan Xian actually felt faintly uneasy. In the days they had spent together since last year, he had adhered to the principle of remembering one word in his heart. In their interactions, he had done his best to reveal his true feelings and treat her with complete sincerity. He would even say some incomparably childish things. On one hand, he truly treasured Haitang as a friend. On the other hand, he wanted to influence this woman from the bottom of his heart and obtain a powerful aid. The sound of hurried hooves came from the lakeside. Fan Xian turned his head to look and saw a fine horse galloping along the stone path by the lakeside. It rode openly to the door of the Peng family's manor, where no official had dared to visit for many days. A somewhat familiar-looking official flipped off the horse and angrily pounded on the door. So many votes. Are you guys trying to scare me to death? I can only say thank you. If you want to know what happened next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. There are more chapters. Support the author and support the original reading. Chapter 345. Abandoning the boat and coming ashore, Fan Xian walked toward the garden with a glimmer of doubt. Haitang was behind him, greeting the old man fishing by the lake. He was not in the mood to be friendly. Looking at the fine horse outside the garden, he furrowed his brows. The official who had come on the horse had already entered the garden. He had left the horse outside the garden and had not tied the reins. It looked like he was indeed in a hurry. The horse was at the bottom of the stone steps with its head lowered. It snorted and smelled the fragrance of the grass growing on the ground. Unfortunately, it was wearing a chewing head. It was anxious but could not eat. Sir. The guard at the door bowed to him. A subordinate moved closer to explain something, but Fan Xian waved his hand to stop him. He had long recognized the angry official. Thinking that after not seeing him for a year, the other party still had the same temperament, he felt slightly angry. Faint sounds of an intense argument came from the depths of the manor. After they went around the screen, the voices immediately grew louder. The words were filled with loud criticism and disappointment and anger that seeped from the bones. Fan Xian stopped his steps and turned his head with a self-mocking smile. He said to Haitang, "Just a small matter. Give me some face and don't come in." Haitang smiled and nodded. She walked toward the small path leading to the garden to the side. Fan Xian tidied up his clothes and patiently listened outside for a long time. Only then did he gently cough twice. Fully assuming the demeanor of a teacher, he put his hands behind his back, stepped over the high threshold and walked into the main hall. In the main hall, two people faced each other like two fighting cocks. On one side was Shi Chanli, and on the other was Yang Wanli, whom he had not seen in a long time. After last year's spring examinations, Yang Wanli had entered the top 3. Because everyone knew he was a direct descendant of the Fan family, the head of the Ministry of Appointments had, with a large stroke of his pen, transferred him to a rich county in Jiangnan to become a county magistrate. This was because of the interference of Yan Hangshu, the Minister of Appointments. Otherwise, with the prestige of the Fan family, it was not impossible for them to directly become a prefectural official or a transportation judge. Yang Wanli had also worked hard for his teacher. He was diligent in government affairs, friendly to the people and eager to learn. In just 1 year, he had managed the affairs under his jurisdiction in an orderly manner. It could be said that he did not pick up any loose ends on the road, nor did he close his doors at night. In the autumn, he was assessed by the Ministry of Appointments as being prudent and fair. When the Supreme Court evaluated him, they also gave him an average score. Although he had not reached the age limit and could not be promoted, he was now a dignified official of the 6th rank. Ho Jichang and Qing Jialin, of the 4 disciples of the Fan family, were now officials in Jiaodong Road and the south respectively. It was said that their official reputations were not bad. After Fan Xian entered the door, he watched coldly as Yang Wanli and Shi Chanli quarreled. He found that Yang Wanli's aura was threatening, while Shi Chanli retreated step by step. After listening for a moment, he knew the reason and laughed coldly. Yang Wanli turned his head to glance at him. He paused and furrowed his brows. Unexpectedly, he turned around and faced Shi Chanli and continued to narrate his grievances. "Brother Shi, it's fine if you don't want to enter officialdom. Following at your teacher's side, helping him make up for his mistakes and doing things diligently, it can be considered a blessing for the people. But now that teacher has clearly done something wrong, why didn't you remind him when you were at his side? We have the etiquette of a disciple. We also have to speak frankly and admonish others. This is the right way. Do you know how unbearable the rumors are in Jiangnan? Everyone says that Commissioner Fan is a capable official. We don't know how he does things, but the way he collects money is honorable and ruthless." Yang Wanli's words were clearly sarcastic. He laughed coldly. "Big river? I think that's a silver river. If that ship doesn't scoop up all the silver in each province, the people in the ship won't go ashore for 1 day." The more he spoke, the angrier he became. He waved his sleeve and said, "As an official, one must benefit the people. Last year, teacher left a letter telling us to be good officials and good people, but, is that what an official does? I almost don't have the face to see anyone right now. Well, sure. You disappoint me. Rotten worms. Trash. Hearing the last two adjectives, Sher Chanli's anger rose. He thought to himself, kid, you're having fun being an upright official outside. How would you know the hardships of being the owner of a brothel in Jingdo? What a scam. You're criticizing teacher as a tiger that eats the people's marrow. Well, Yang Wanli, you haven't been an official for long, but you've grown a lot more daring. Hot blood rushed and he scolded back. You're a pedantic scholar who doesn't know the hardships of the people. If teacher wasn't in the capital, do you think you could get a good evaluation? Ungrateful bastard. Yang Wanli raised his face and said with pain in his clear pride, although I only govern one county within a year, there were no bandits in the county and the people were peaceful. I have lived up to Sir Fan Jr.'s initial expectations. In reality, Sher Chanli understood why the other party was so angry and had come directly to his door. As the saying goes, the greater the hope, the greater the disappointment. They all hoped to follow Sir Fan Jr. and accomplish great things in the Qin Kingdom. They were truly loyal people. However, Fan Xian was now in the Overwatch Council and held great power. The things he did were indeed like those of a powerful official, but the gap between him and a famous official seemed to be growing larger and larger. However, Sher Chanli had been by Fan Xian's side for many years and knew that his teacher had many things he had to do. Furthermore, his feelings were deeper, so he unconsciously smiled coldly and retorted, there were no bandits? If the provincial camp had not moved 12 li into your Fujian county, do you think those bandits would have been scared away by your words of a saint? 12 li is not very eye-catching, right? But do you, a little county magistrate, have that ability? Yang Wanli furrowed his brows and asked, what do you mean by that? What do I mean? Sher Chanli turned his head to glance at Fan Xian and furrowed his brows. It seemed that he was wondering why the guards in the courtyard had not stopped this person. If an outsider heard his argument with Yang Wanli, it would be terrible. At this moment, the most innocent person was, of course, Fan Xian. The two students were happily arguing. As the main character, he had stood to the side for a long time, but no one paid attention to him. He had been left to dry. He continued Sher Chanli's words with a smile and said, nothing much. It's just that the old man felt sorry for you all and wrote a letter to the commander in the province. Only now did the two arguing people recognize Fan Xian's voice. At the same time they jumped in fright. A moment later they said in surprise, is it teacher? Fan Xian stretched out his hand and rubbed the side of his temple a few times, rubbing away the glue at the corner of his eyebrows. His eyebrows returned to their original position, and his delicate and handsome face returned to normal. After he entered the room, he had forgotten to take off his makeup, so the two arguing people did not recognize him. He laughed bitterly and said, even if you want to argue, you have to do it behind closed doors. I'm the one who heard it. If outsiders heard it, I'm afraid they would think something big has happened to the Fan family. The hall of the manor immediately quieted down. Thinking that the contents of their argument had all fallen into Fan Xian's ears, regardless of whether it was Sher Chanli or Yang Wanli, they both felt a bit awkward. The two of them invited Fan Xian to sit in the middle and sat on either side. Although Fan Xian was a bit younger, the absurd seniority of teacher and student had to be done properly. Yang Wanli rubbed his head with a slight headache. Suddenly he thought of Fan Xian's last words, deceiving teacher and destroying ancestors. He abruptly raised his head and yelled in a loud voice, Sir, I didn't mean it that way. Fan Xian looked at him with amusement. He knew that Yang Wanli came from a poor background in Min and looked down on corrupt officials. Furthermore, his personality was straightforward and fiery. Otherwise, he would not have barged in so carelessly. He opened his mouth and asked, Fujian County is a full 200 li from Hangzhou. You, a civil official, rushed here without a bailiff and called me a tiger that eats people without spitting out the bones in front of my face. If this isn't deceiving teacher, then what is? He was joking, but the weight of this joke was not something Yang Wanli could bear. However, Yang Wanli's personality was truly straightforward. Gritting his teeth, he walked in front of Fan Xian and bowed to the ground. In a low voice he said, I was wrong. I was wrong in speaking nonsense behind your back. Fan Xian was slightly surprised. He wondered how this guy could turn so quickly. Unexpectedly, Yang Wanli's tone changed and he said straightforwardly, however, since teacher has returned to the manor in front of you, I will say it. You know that I have never been afraid to speak my teacher's mistakes directly. Say it, Fan Xian said helplessly. You are just like this. Sir has come to Jiangnan to manage finances for the court. I think there are 3 things you shouldn't have done. Yang Wanli did not listen to Fan Xian's evaluation of his personality at all. 3 things you shouldn't have done? Fan Xian jumped in fright. He had thought it was just Su Wenmao's problem of collecting money. He had not expected there to be 3 things he shouldn't have done. Did you think Qi Jiqiang was singing 10 things he shouldn't have done in prison? First, you shouldn't have allowed your subordinates to plunder the people's wealth along the river and use the people's power. Yang Wanli had not slept well last night, so he had made up his mind to come to Hangzhou to admonish him. He said with deep pain, when the Jing ship went south, the officials of the counties along the river went out of their way to welcome it and sent gifts like mountains. They also drove the people to pull the ship. The water in the Jiangnan area is calm. If the big ship had not purposely moved slowly, why would there be a need for people to drag it? This matter has long spread throughout Jiangnan and become a joke. Where did the gifts from the county officials along the river come from? Didn't they increase taxes and plunder from the people? You shouldn't have, as the commissioner of the Overwatch Council, ignored the laws of the country, accepted bribes, disregarded the will of the people and toiled the people. Fan Xian acted as if he hadn't heard. He waved his hand for Shi Chanli to pour a cup of tea and gulped it down. Yang Wanli saw his expression and manner and felt a little uneasy in his heart. He didn't know if his teacher was truly angry, but this made his anger even greater. Straightforwardly he said, "Second, you shouldn't have mobilized the Jiangnan Navy ships to protect you. Although you have the identity of an imperial envoy, since you did not show your honor at the beginning and instead traveled in the night, this is already against the rules. Since you moved stealthily and mobilized soldiers to protect you, other than breaking the rules, you have crossed the line, disturbed the place and relaxed the defenses. It is a serious offense." Fan Xian spat out the tea in his mouth with a puff and laughingly scolded, "You want me to be chopped to pieces? Will your heart feel better?" He waved his hand to stop Yang Wanli's following words and opened his mouth to say, "Let's talk about these 2 things first." He thought about it for a moment. "I have also heard some rumors about the matter of accepting gifts along the river. It is indeed very bad. According to letters from Jingdo, this matter seems to have become an absurd joke in the Jingdo officialdom. Everyone says that I, Fan Xian, have been stifled in the capital. Once I came to Jiangnan, I wanted to rip off a few layers of land." Yang Wanli listened to his words and felt a slight joy in his heart. He said, "Exactly. Putting aside the problem of breaking the law and breaking the rules, just this effect is a great blow to your official reputation. It is a great blow to your official reputation, right? Earlier you said that you had no face to see people now. Wanli, you wholeheartedly want to be an upright official whose name will go down in history. Yet you have a corrupt official like me as your teacher. Presumably you are not happy in your heart. I understand that. However," his tone changed. "Regardless of how the Jiangnan officials see it, how the people see it, and how the 6 ministries in the capital discuss it, other people do not care. The problem is, you are my student. How can you think that I would be greedy?" Yang Wanli was startled. He thought to himself, "The great achievements of that big ship of yours are the truth. The evidence is there. Nowadays people are saying that the reason Commissioner Fan came to Jiangnan so mysteriously and divided it into 3 routes, north, south and south, was to collect the gifts from all 3 routes at once. Could it be that people are wrong about you? I have plenty of silver." Fan Xian looked at Yang Wanli and cursed angrily. "Why do I need to be greedy? What is your brain made of? You, Jichang and Jialin are now officials outside. Every month you must receive silver from the old masters in the capital. Why is that? Isn't it because I am afraid you will be dragged down by the money of your colleagues around you? This is what I ask of you, what more for myself?" Ever since the spring examinations had been released, Yang Wanli and the other 2 had received banknotes from Jingdo every month. The amount had long exceeded their salary. This matter actually had nothing to do with Fan Xian. He also did not think it would be so detailed. It was all Minister Fan carefully taking care of it for his son. With silver on hand, Yang Wanli and the other 2 had much more freedom. They could also use the silver to do some practical things. He thought of the details of Fan Xian's concern and felt moved. He was also quite frightened by Fan Xian's rare angry expression. He quickly replied, "Thank you, teacher." Fan Xian smiled and scolded, "You should thank me for giving money. Why don't you think about where the money came from? Of course it is not from greed. You know I have a few businesses under me. I can still afford to support you officials." Yang Wanli furrowed his brows and said, "But, that boat on the river? What does that boat have to do with me?" Fan Xian's expression was somewhat shameless. "If you want to fight for your position to scold corrupt officials, go scold those people on the boat. Running to Hangzhou to scold me? Yang Wanli, you sure have some guts. Yang Wanli said gloomily, teacher, those people are your subordinates. Fan Xian smiled slightly and said, yes, my subordinates take the silver, but I don't care. It seems that everything is carried out under my orders? This is just a show, what are you in such a hurry for? Shi Chanli also urged from the side, sir must have a deeper meaning. You barging in like this today will probably make many people laugh in secret. Yang Wanli thought about it and agreed with this reasoning. Even if Sir Fan Jr. wanted to be greedy, there was no need to be greedy in such a grand and spectacular manner. Was he really wrong? There isn't much deeper meaning, Fan Xian sighed and said. It is just a show to be performed in Suzhou on the 3rd of March. That show is too mushy. Just thinking about it gives me goosebumps. When the time comes you'll understand. Yang Wanli already believed what Fan Xian said and didn't say anything more. He regretted coming so rashly. If he ruined his teacher's grand plan to manage the treasury, that would not be good. To say it again shouldn't be. Fan Xian furrowed his brows. Wanli, you are too naive. Do you really think it is a time of peace and prosperity? Yang Wanli was slightly startled. He thought to himself that the country was at peace and the people were at peace. The weather was good. How could it be fake? Fan Xian smiled coldly and tried to scare him. If I don't get the navy to protect me, that ship could be dragged to the bottom of the river by the water demons at any time. Do you believe that? Looking at Yang Wanli's expression, he knew that he would not believe it. Fan Xian shook his head and said, I won't hide the matter of the palace treasury from you. What I have to deal with is not just the bugs in the palace treasury, the noble families in Jiangnan, and even all of the officials in Jiangnan and nobles in Jingdou. How did the Ming family rise? How did they manage to make their family business so large? Faced with this question, Yang Wanli shook his head. Shi Chanli had only recently come into contact with secret reports from the Overwatch Council and the Jiangnan water bandits, Xia Qifei, and only then did he know a little. Pirates? A harsh light flashed through Fan Xian's eyes. The Ming family took the goods from the palace treasury and went out to sea from Quanzhou. They went all the way north to Dongyi and all the way south to the foreign devils in the west. These years after they went out to sea they would always run into pirates. Out of 3 ships, 1 would always be lost. Yang Wanli furrowed his brows. He had come into contact with the Ming family before. They were all gentle and kind rich people. If they ran into pirates out to sea, it would not be good to have them take responsibility. Was there a hidden meaning in his words? Fan Xian said in a cold voice, in reality, those pirates were all the Ming family's own people. Yang Wanli paled in shock. When the palace treasury's goods ran into pirates, the Ming family still had to pay the palace treasury. It looked like a loss, but in reality they stole that ship of goods and secretly shipped it overseas to sell. They didn't have to pay the court's 60% share of the ship's goods. Furthermore, what they paid the palace treasury was only the cost. The profit from this ship was even more than the other 2 ships. However, it's a pity that in these years who knows how many more souls have died on the sea. Yang Wanli was dumbstruck and muttered to himself, This isn't much more for the Ming family. Why would they take the risk of being beheaded? What Fan Xian said was what the Overwatch Council and Xia Qifei had found out through their cooperation. It was a pity that they had never found any living witnesses. These years the Ming family had used such ruthless methods to earn who knew how much silver. These people were vicious and merciless. The wind was tight and there were nobles protecting them. Thus, everyone in court only thought that the trip to Hainan was full of dangerous winds and dangerous waves and rampant sea bandits. They had no idea that the Ming family was stealing their own goods and playing the game of a merchant family of bandits. He stood up and stared into Yang Wanli's eyes. Once there is a suitable profit, merchants become bold. For a 50% profit they will take the risk out of desperation. For a 100% profit, they will dare to trample on all Qing laws. For a 300% profit, they will dare to commit any crime, even risk the danger of being hanged, and not have any regard for the court. Yang and Shi were both shaken by Marx's famous words and lowered their heads, savoring them for a long time. Furthermore, there have always been their comrades in court. Fan Xian smiled coldly. The money earned in proper exports has to be entered into the books. How can it be as convenient and safe as spending money outside of the books? These words were referring to the Xinyang matter. If they hadn't used such ruthless methods, it would have been much more difficult for the eldest princess to fish out silver from the palace treasury under the Overwatch Council's long years of surveillance. Every copper is dripping with blood, Fan Xian lectured Yang Wanli. Fan Xian educated Yang Wanli. If you and I want to do things, we must ensure our own safety. The Ming family can kill people and will kill people. When it comes to a life and death struggle, they will not be afraid of killing me. In the face of life and death, there is no need to talk about etiquette. You've been an official for a long time, don't become a piece of rotten wood. Yang Wanli was dumbfounded. He had studied hard for 10 years. After becoming an official, he had Fan Xian, this big tree, secretly protecting him. He had never truly experienced the dangers of the human world. Now, after being scolded by Fan Xian, he finally became a little more clear-headed. After calming down a little, Fan Xian waved his hand and said, "Never mind, let's not talk about these things for now. Although you came to kick down the door today, there are indeed no guests in the garden. We haven't seen each other in a year, so there are some things we have to talk about. In a bit, prepare some food and wine and let's have a good drink." Yang Wanli hung his head dejectedly, but he knew that his teacher still saw him as one of the closest people to him. He let out a breath. However, he somewhat regretted his impetuousness. Suddenly he thought of something and hesitantly asked, "Then third, shouldn't we?" Fan Xian laughingly scolded, "If you don't offend me to the end, it looks like you won't be able to eat. Speak." Yang Wanli thought about it and felt that this matter was indeed his teacher's fault, so he confidently said, "Recently, auspicious signs have appeared one after another in various places. The officials and commoners will always say a few words after drinking. I have never said it in front of others, but in front of my teacher, I had to take the liberty to suggest it. Using beauty to influence people will not last long. Using flattery to gain favor is also not the style of a court official. Teachers' actions in this matter are truly unethical." Fan Xian paused. He knew that although Yang Wanli's personality was stubborn, he was still very smart. He had seen that the auspicious signs in the surroundings were created by Fan Xian. But this kid dared to scold him in front of Fan Xian for sucking up to the emperor. "Get out." Fan Xian finally became angry and scolded, "Don't eat any more. Go back to your Fujian county to eat porridge." At this moment Yang Wanli was quite straightforward. He straightened his back and allowed his teacher's spittle to wash his face. With a face full of righteousness he said, "I want to eat porridge in Pingyuan today." Fan Xian angrily brushed his sleeves and walked out the door. Shi and Yang hurriedly followed behind, not daring to take even half a step away. It was not until now that this young man, who was not yet 20, finally had the appearance of a young man and was no longer the teacher who sat upright and pretended to be experienced and mature. On the third day of the third month, the dragon raised its head. The carriages from Danzhou to visit relatives and the ships from Jingdou following the Yinjiang all arrived at the docks outside Suzhou. The night before, a group from Hangzhou had already quietly boarded the ship. The three groups from Jingdou had finally triumphantly met up in Jiangnan. On the docks, gongs and drums rang out to the heavens and firecrackers rang out. The officials of Jiangnan Road at all levels tidied up their official robes. Under the signboard, they raised their heads in anticipation of the arrival of the Imperial College's Sai, Taichung Temple's Vice Minister, Overwatch Council's Commissioner, Jiangnan Road's Imperial Envoy, Sir Fan Jr. Fan Xian. Fan Xian does so many things. This chapter of mine is really not smooth. I don't know why. To be continued. If you want to know what happens next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. There are more chapters. Support the author and support the original reading. Chapter 346. Let me admit here that I did write incorrectly yesterday about the old dragon raising its head. I'll go with the flow and continue with the 3rd of March. In any case, no one has studied the Qin calendar. Was I a bit shameless? However, today's chapter was written much smoother than yesterday's. On the 3rd of March in the Qin calendar, the dragon raising its head. A large ship, under the escort of the Jiangnan Navy, slowly approached the dock. The anchor was dropped and the ropes were released. The officers nimbly completed a series of actions. Immediately after, a gangplank that looked like a flight of stairs was placed between the dock and the deck. The officials on the shore quickly spread out a thick cloth to prevent their feet from slipping. A curtain of spring thunder rolled across the horizon, crackling as if welcoming the arrival of the imperial envoy. At the same time, firecrackers rang out on the dock. Gongs and drums filled the air. The soaring thunder that had been prepared on the shore was also ignited. The sound of the cannons was so loud that it even drowned out the might of the heavens. The officials on the dock furrowed their brows but were too embarrassed to cover their ears. They could only turn their gazes to the gangplank. In a moment, a young official appeared on the deck and led a group of guards off the ship in silence. They split into two lines. After a while, A young and handsome official wearing a purple official robe walked out with a smile. He wore a crane cape over his official robe. The white color immediately diluted the deep purple of the official robe. It drew the gazes of everyone on the dock to his warm, friendly, and incomparably delicate face. Only third-level officials and above had the right to wear purple official robes. The officials on the dock knew that the Imperial Envoy Commissioner Fan they had been calling for was this person in front of them. They unconsciously squeezed forward a few steps and raised their hands in greeting. Fan Xian was not in a hurry to stop everyone from bowing. On the contrary, he stretched out his hand to the side and grabbed a small hand that stretched out of thin air. Holding the hand of a little boy, they stood side by side on the deck and stepped onto the ladder, descending the ship. The little boy was wearing a light yellow robe with a circle of fluff sticking out from the collar. There was a pair of cute yet unknown spirit beasts embroidered on the robe. Coupled with his beautiful face and lively eyes, he looked extremely adorable. The officials were shocked. They knew that this was the third prince who had been chased by the emperor to Fan Xian's side. They quickly adjusted their direction and saluted the third prince. The officials of Jiangnan Road greet your highness. The third prince smiled and nodded. Using his voice that had yet to fade away, he said, "The weather is cold. Sirs, thank you for your hard work. I'm only here to study with my teacher, so there's no need to stand on ceremony." Reminded by the word teacher, the officials quickly bowed to Fan Xian again. They repeatedly thanked him for coming all the way here. As they bowed, the dozens of officials stole glances at the two men who walked down from the boat. They discovered that although their ages were quite different, their faces were extremely similar. Standing on the shore, the wind from the river fluttered the hem of the two men's clothes. Not only did they exude a noble aura, they also exuded a rare sense of harmony and transcendence. Everyone couldn't help but begin to suspect in their hearts. It looked like the rumor about Commissioner Fan's past was probably true. Thinking of this, they began to feel uneasy again. They didn't know if bowing to the third prince first would make Fan Xian unhappy. After all, he was the true master. Furthermore, the status of an imperial envoy, according to the court system, was much more valuable than that of an underage prince. Fan Xian did not have so many thoughts. He gazed at the unfamiliar officials on the dock and piled the friendliest smile on his face. He smiled and acknowledged each one of them. He then did his best to note down each other's official position and name, fully displaying the courtesy and pride a rising political star should have. Commissioner Fan bringing a prince down to Jiangnan was a major event. Thus, there were many officials who came to the dock to welcome him. Among the civil officials, there were officials directly under the governor of the Jiangnan Road Governor's Manor, as well as the Zhizhou of Suzhou and Hangzhou, each leading two groups of people. Although the Zhizhou of a few distant provinces did not dare to leave their jurisdiction to welcome him, there were still many officials of the same rank from the provinces. There were also officials from the Jiangnan Salt Road Transport Company. Among the military officials, there was no lack of Jiangnan Navy garrison generals. Of course, the Palace Treasury Transport Company, which was directly under Fan Xian's command, had even more people present. In short, there were nearly 100 people. More than half of the officials of Jiangnan Road had probably squeezed onto the dock. If Dong Yi stole the gunpowder of the 3rd Bureau of the Overwatch Council and made a ruckus here, the wealthiest and populous Jiangnan Road in the entire Qing Kingdom would probably be paralyzed within a day. On the dock, Fan Xian greeted the officials with a face full of smiles. The problem was, he could only see the moving heads, the jumble of official robes, and the thick smell of sweat in the winter. Strange and flattering faces flashed past his eyes. How could he recognize who was who? These officials did not know how he felt in his heart. Seeing that the smile on Sir Fan Jr.'s face did not diminish, they felt more and more that the gifts they had given along the way had an effect. They boldly squeezed to his and the third prince's side. No matter what, they had to exchange a few pleasantries and worm their way closer. Only then would they be worthy of the silver they had given. Those state and county officials who were slightly further away from the river had never found an opportunity to present gifts, so their spirits were not that great. With a tinge of envy and a tinge of jealousy, they watched their colleagues inside the crowd unbearably flatter him from the outside. For a moment, the smell of flattery on the dock was unbearable. Fan Xian's cleanly shaved chin was touched countless times. It was very lively. Gradually, the words of the officials became more and more unbearable, particularly those of the Suzhou government Zhizhou. They were people who had come out of the Imperial College. They insisted on using the fact that Fan Xian was now the Imperial College's side to repeatedly call him Teacher Fan. Fan Xian forcefully suppressed the irritation in his heart and refused to accept it. What a joke. He was not even 20 years old, yet he was going to be the teacher of a Zhizhou. If this got back to Jingdo, he would probably be laughed to death by the emperor. The third prince was held by his little hand and endured the shameless words beside him. He was also unhappy in his heart. He thought to himself, Sir Fan Jr. is my teacher. How dare you old men fight with me for him? The child finally could not endure it and coughed with a cold face. After the cough, the scene immediately became silent. The Hangzhou Zhizhou was a sly old fox who saw the opportunity very quickly. He was secretly happy that the Suzhou Zhizhou had suffered a setback, but he said seriously, "It is cold today. I think everyone should quickly invite the imperial envoy and the prince up to rest." After these words were said, Fan Xian and the third prince's hearts were comforted. At the same time, they cast an appreciative gaze toward the Hangzhou Zhizhou. The Hangzhou Zhizhou was swept by this gaze and immediately felt his entire body warm and uncomfortable. It was as if he had eaten ginseng. Rest? It was not that easy. Even after the officials had retreated slightly, the related ceremony still took up a lot of time. Only then did Fan Xian and the prince walk around the officials toward the slope on the shore. There was a large bamboo shed on the slope. It looked quite new. It had probably been built only a few days ago. It had been specially prepared for Fan Xian's trip to Jiangnan. Walking up the slope, there were already two high-ranking officials in purple robes waiting outside the bamboo shed. As soon as Fan Xian saw the two of them, he pulled the third prince's hand and hurried a few steps toward them to show his respect. The identities of these two officials were not ordinary. One was the Jiangnan Road Governor, Sir Xueqing. The other was Inspector Dai Siqing. In the officialdom of the Qing Kingdom there was a saying, 1 palace, 2 provinces, 3 courts, 7 roads. 1 palace was naturally the royal palace. The 2 provinces were the Hall of Governmental Affairs, which was now combined to handle government affairs. The 3 courts were the Overwatch Council, Bureau of Military Affairs, and the Ministry of Education. However, the Ministry of Education had already been reduced to the Imperial College, Tunguen Pavilion, and the Ministry of Rights in the new policies of the first year of the Qing calendar. The last 7 roads referred to the 7 roads that the Qing kingdom was now divided into. The governors of each road represented the emperor in patrolling one area. Furthermore, the administrative functions of the counties between the roads and provinces had gradually faded. Other than military affairs, the governors of each road had begun to directly control the provinces and counties under their jurisdiction. They had great power and were truly officials of the borders. Of course, the emperor had to choose his most trusted aide to hold this important position. Furthermore, the governors were top-notch in terms of ability. Compared to the governor's power and arrogance, the inspectors were more focused on the administration of culture, but their weight was much lighter. If it was based on rank, the governors were second grade, and the inspectors were second grade. They were not particularly high ranks. However, in order to make it easier for the governors of the 7 roads to focus on government affairs and be less restrained by the 6 ministries, the rules had always been for the governors of the first road to also hold the title of assistant scholar, right imperial censor of the imperial censorate, or minister of the Ministry of War. These were first-grade officials. When faced with the prime minister and hall of governmental affairs, they had the weight to speak. Jiangnan was the most important place in the Qing kingdom. The present Jiangnan Road Governor, Xueqing, was deeply trusted by the emperor. Thus, he directly held the title of Great Scholar of the Palace and was a proper first-grade super-official. Given Xueqing's status, even Fan Xian and the third prince did not dare to slight him, so they quickened their steps. When they arrived outside the bamboo shed, Fan Xian only glanced at Xueqing with a warm gaze and did not open his mouth to speak first. This was the rule. Xueqing and Dai Siqing understood that the other party was an imperial envoy. No matter how powerful he was, he still had to first bow to the other party. This was not to Fan Xian or the prince. It was to the emperor. After setting up the incense table, asking for the imperial edict, and unsheathing their swords, the officials inside the bamboo shed all knelt on the ground. After completing the ceremony, Fan Xian quickly helped the Jiangnan governor, Xueqing, up. He then turned to help the inspector up. Only then did he lead the third prince in bowing respectfully to Xueqing. Xueqing's status was worthy of him and the third prince bowing deeply. However, this Jiangnan governor seemed to have not thought that the legendary commissioner Fan did not have a trace of the noble air of a young, powerful official and scholar. He was willing to smooth over a small matter. A glimmer of admiration flashed through his eyes. The inspector stood to the side and quickly turned his body to return the bow. Xueqing would not foolishly allow these brothers, in front of him, to finish their bow. He had already warmly helped the two of them up and said, "Sir Fan, you are being too polite." Fan Xian was startled. He then looked at the third prince beside him, who seemed to be somewhat embarrassed facing Xueqing, and felt even more depressed. Xueqing smiled slightly and said, "Before I came to Jiangnan I worked in the library. The so-called scholar is not completely an empty title. When the third prince was young he often played by my side, however many years have passed. I don't know if the third prince still remembers." The third prince laughed bitterly and once again bowed to Xueqing in a disciple's bow. In a quiet voice he said, "Every year when you return to the capital to report on your work, my father orders me to go to your manor to pay my respects. How could I forget?" Fan Xian was a bit confused. He thought about it carefully and was increasingly unclear just what the emperor in Jingdo was thinking. As he was thinking, he heard Xueqing say in an even voice, "Speaking of which, Sir Fan and I also have some history." Fan Xian couldn't act innocent in front of this high-ranking official. He asked curiously, "To be honest, I truly do not know." Xueqing liked the other party's straightforwardness. He smiled and stroked his beard. "When I passed the provincial examinations, my teacher was Prime Minister Lin. In terms of seniority, you really do have to call me brother." Only now did Fan Xian understand what was going on. However, the other party was now a governor. The past friendships were just words. Furthermore, no matter how thick-skinned, black-hearted, and daring he was, it would be embarrassing for him to climb up this pole and call the governor brother. The power in his hands was enough, but his age and experience seemed to be a bit lacking. The group of people rested for a moment in the grass hut. Fan Xian and Xueqing chatted about what they had seen and heard along the way. Xueqing furrowed his brows slightly and then asked if the emperor was well in the capital. In short, it was all a bunch of conventional nonsense. However, it did bring them a bit closer and a bit more familiar. Fan Xian looked at this first-level official and found that there was a glimmer of worry that was not purposely hidden in the other party's clear face. After thinking for a moment, he knew what was going on. As the Jiangnan governor, an imperial envoy had suddenly appeared in his territory. No matter which governor it was, it would not be good. Furthermore, this imperial envoy was going to take over the palace treasury. He would probably have to fight with the nobles in the capital. Although the governor had great power and was deeply trusted by the emperor, it was not good to be stuck in the middle. Xueqing raised his teacup and took a gentle sip. Intentionally or unintentionally, he asked, "Sir Fan Jr. will probably have to work hard in Jiangnan these 2 years. Although he is trusted by the emperor, Jiangnan is not like Jingdo. Although it is prosperous, it is not a place to stay for long. In another 2 years, I will have to retire to the emperor and return to the capital to sit as a fisherman. Being able to get closer to the emperor is always better than staying in Jiangnan." Fan Xian heard the meaning in his words and smiled in agreement. "Sir Fan Jr. will be patrolling on behalf of the emperor. You have worked hard and performed well." Xueqing smiled slightly and said, "Has Sir Fan Jr. decided where to live? There are many salt merchants in Suzhou. They are all willing to offer up their manors for you to choose from." Everyone under heaven knew the wealth of the salt merchants. Fan Xian didn't need to ask to know how extravagant the manors they offered up would be. However, he changed the topic and said, "It is not good to be too disturbing. Furthermore, if it gets back to the capital, I will always feel uneasy." He spoke straightforwardly and made Xueqing shake his head and laugh. He thought to himself that the Shi family had this bad habit of hiding everything they did. "Why didn't you hide it when you were collecting silver on the river?" Fan Xian asked sincerely, "Sir, please give me your advice. In the past, the Palace Treasury Transport Company head envoys were arranged?" Xueqing glanced at him with some surprise and said, "Sir Fan, your status is not like the previous head envoys of the Palace Treasury Transport Company. Speaking of arrangements, the official residence the Palace Treasury has decided on is far away in Min. However, no head envoy has actually gone there to live in these dozen years. Just take your predecessor, Sir Huang, for example. He lived in Xinjiang for a long time." When he said Xinjiang, the Jiangnan governor glanced at Fan Xian, intentionally or not. Fan Xian furrowed his brows slightly and said, "I don't have to live in the official residence arranged by the court?" These words seemed suspicious and probing. Xueqing nodded. Fan Xian smiled and said, "I dare not hide it from you. I have been living in Hangzhou this month and have not come to Suzhou to visit you. It is my fault, however that manner is not bad. If I could choose, of course I would like to live in Hangzhou." Xueqing was slightly startled. He hadn't expected Fan Xian to bring up living in Hangzhou. He looked into Fan Xian's eyes and was silent for a moment. It was as if he was guessing whether this popular young official's words were true or false. The Jiangnan governor's manor was in Suzhou. What he feared the most was that Fan Xian would also stay in Suzhou. Not to mention interfering with government affairs, just the situation of both sides being equal was enough to give the Jiangnan road officials endless headaches. It was a great hindrance to him in handling affairs. He looked at Fan Xian's sincere expression and a strange light flashed through his eyes. He smiled slightly and said, "Naturally, it is no problem. Wherever Sir Fan wants to live, you can live there." Fan Xian chuckled and said, "Of course, even if I live in Hangzhou, I still have to come to Suzhou often to disturb you for a few meals. I hear that you use famous northern chi chefs in your manor. The people of Jingdou are all envious. I also want to have the good fortune to eat them." Governor Shui laughed loudly and said, "That is exactly what I like. I didn't think that Sir Fan would also be someone with the same interests. There is no need to wait. Tonight, my colleagues have prepared a welcoming banquet for you and His Highness. It is at the Jiangnan restaurant. Tomorrow I will invite you to sit at my home." Receiving Fan Xian's promise not to interfere with his affairs, the Jiangnan governor found it difficult to stop himself from relaxing. These loud laughter immediately spread throughout the bamboo shed. The Jiangnan road officials followed the laughter and looked over. They saw the governor and the commissioner chatting happily. After their hearts relaxed, they secretly admired them. They thought that Sir Fan Jr. was indeed not a normal person. The competitive situation that everyone was secretly afraid of did not happen. They didn't know what he had said to make the governor so happy. They saw Fan Xian move closer to Governor Shui Qing's ear and quietly say something. After a moment of surprise, Shui Qing's expression immediately became solemn. In a moment of anger, he nodded his head and huffed coldly. "Sir Fan, don't worry too much. Don't give me face. I always remember the Emperor's benevolence and kindness, so I will temporarily tolerate these people. Sir Fan's suggestion is correct." Fan Xian received the other person's nod and knew that Shui Qing was returning the favor of him not staying in Suzhou. He sincerely expressed his thanks and then slowly stood up. Fan Xian stood up. The bamboo shed immediately quieted down. At this moment, the sunlight above the river shone through the bamboo shed, spreading out a clear light. The river wind was slightly cool and gave rise to a glimmer of solemnity. Everyone looked at him. They didn't know how this imperial envoy's declaration of office would begin. "I am a person who does not act according to common sense." Fan Xian first glanced at the officials around him and smiled. "Although I have never worked with you all in the past, presumably I have some reputation. Everyone knows a little about me. At best, my personality is always unconventional. At worst, I am a troublemaker who doesn't know the severity of things." The officials chuckled and all said that the imperial envoy's words were humorous and modest. Fan Xian said without modesty, "I don't need to say more of those empty words. The emperor is in good health and does not need your greetings. The empress dowager is in good health, and there is a sense of peace and auspiciousness in the capital. Thus, we do not need to add more words in this area. Since you all have received the court's heavy trust to govern the important Jiangnan area, the taxes and income these years are all displayed here. The people's life and city scenes you have seen along the way are not fake. I do not need to mention your hard work." The Jiangnan officials all knew that Fan Xian had come on a secret visit. Hearing these words, they let out a big breath. They only hoped that Fan Xian would mention a few more words, preferably a few more words in the secret memorial to the emperor. Unexpectedly, Fan Xian's tone changed. "I won't talk about your benefits. Instead, I want to talk about where you all did wrong." Fan Xian's face was still smiling, but a chill began to rise in the shed. "It seems a bit unkind, but I still want to say why. Because you all seem to have forgotten my background." What was Fan Xian's background? It was not some immortal poet, Taichung Temple, but rather, the dark and sinister Overwatch Council. The hearts of the officials jumped. They didn't know what he was going to say next. They thought, "We've already sent the silver, what else do you want?" Even the Overwatch Council couldn't bully people like this. "I came by land and passed through Shazhou and Hangzhou, while that ship sailed on the Yangtze River." Fan Xian narrowed his eyes. "I heard that the great river is a silver river. You have all sent a great deal of gifts and silver to that ship, and you have also worked a great number of commoners to pull the rope. I appreciate your great kindness. However, to bribe so openly, I admire you. You all have great courage." Without waiting for the officials to speak, Fan Xian turned around and bowed to the Jiangnan governor Shui Qing. He smiled slightly and said, "Today, seeing me in front of you, the governor flew into a rage and directly rebuked me. I couldn't help but feel a bit frightened and not understand why. Fortunately, the governor sympathized with my ignorance and told me directly. Only then did I know that you all had secretly done such a daring thing behind my back. His voice gradually rose as he smiled coldly. The Overwatch Council monitors the governance of the country and catches corrupt officials. Yet, you all have the audacity to bribe and give gifts to me. Do you all think that since I have left Jingdo the knife in my hand, will not be able to kill people? The officials were dumbstruck. They were so shocked by Fan Xian's words that they didn't know what to say. They turned their pleading gazes toward the governor and found that he was stroking his beard and deep in thought, adopting an attitude of not being involved in the matter. Only now did the officials understand what Fan Xian had said earlier. He had said that these officials along the river had hidden the gifts from him, so he had easily brought him out. He had also used the governor's anger as an excuse to strip the governor clean of his name. He had also given the governor the hat of not fearing the nobility and noble character and unquestionable integrity. Giving gifts along the river? Your subordinate didn't refuse. The Overwatch Council's information network was smooth. Even if you were in Hangzhou, how could you not know? However, Fan Xian insisted that he knew nothing. Of course, the Jiangnan Road officials could not fight back. They could only swallow a huge loss. Looking at Fan Xian's expression again, they realized something was wrong. This Commissioner Fan was indeed as the rumors said. Under the gentle and harmless smiling face hid shamelessness, lowliness and viciousness. The officials didn't know what Fan Xian would do next. They unconsciously stood up in fright and looked at Fan Xian stupidly. They saw him clap his hands. The sound traveled outside the hut. An Overwatch Council official held a thick gift list in his hands and walked down from the Jingdo boat. The gift list was already so thick. The gifts hidden on the boat had probably piled up into a small mountain. Fan Xian turned and asked Governor Xueqing for instructions. Xueqing smiled slightly as he watched the scene in front of him. He waved his hand to signal for the bailiffs in the yamen to follow the Overwatch Council officials onto the boat. Not long after, the bailiffs and servants laboriously pulled a few large chests off the boat and came to the bamboo hut. The chests were opened in front of everyone. All that could be seen was a sea of golden light. There were countless jewels and other valuable items inside. They were all gifts sent by the officials along the river. The wind in the hut was cold, so a brazier was lit. Fan Xian accepted the gift list his subordinate handed over and flipped through a few pages. His eyebrows rose slightly. He smiled and said, "There are quite a lot of things." The officials were embarrassed and angry at the same time. They thought to themselves that the imperial envoy's actions were too unkind. Framing crimes was truly disgusting. Did he want to punish the officials? Unless he wanted to wipe out the entire Jiangnan officialdom in one go. At that time, the governor would not be able to continue watching the show. You've broken the rules and offended the Jiangnan officials. Let's see how you clean up in the future. Unexpectedly, Fan Xian's next action made the officials' eyes almost fall out. They saw him casually toss the thick gift list into the brazier. The fire immediately grew. The gift list that recorded the evidence of the officials' bribery quickly turned to ash. Fan Xian stood by the brazier in silence for a moment. He then said, "Don't think I am using childish tricks to buy people's hearts. You are not that stupid and I am not that self-interested. The reason I burned all of this was to give everyone a reminder and a way out." He placed his hands behind his back. A glimmer of unswerving determination flashed across his delicate face. "I am the commissioner of the Overwatch Council. I do not need to give you face. The matters I need to do in Jiangnan also do not need everyone's cooperation. Thus I ask everyone to wake up. If something similar happens in the future, don't blame me for being merciless in arresting people." The Overwatch Council could investigate all officials under third level. Since he dared to say this, it meant he had the courage. As for the problem of face, his identity was too special, more special than any other court official. Thus he indeed did not need to give face. As for the problem of cooperation in future matters, once the Jiangnan Road officials lost face, would they dare to secretly go against the commissioner? After the welcoming banquet in a moment, "Everyone take back all the things in this chest." Fan Xian furrowed his brows and said, "What should be refunded has been refunded. As for the laborers, give them wages at a discount. If those poor counties can't produce it at the moment, send a letter to me. I can still produce this bit of silver." The officials had no choice but to lower their heads in acknowledgement. At this moment, the zip line on the Suzhou dock began to move. This novel toy from over 20 years ago was the best at carrying heavy loads. The zip line extended to the top of the Jingjing ship and slowly lowered a large chest. No one knew what was in the chest for it to be so heavy. The zipline's steel ropes trembled gently. Fan Xian had already checked the data beforehand and knew that the Suzhou dock was responsible for the palace treasury's goods. It had the ability to lift things, so he was not too worried. However, the officials who had just been shocked by him were shocked again. The large chest was hoisted onto the shore. Another dozen people moved it with great difficulty up the slope and directly into the bamboo shed. An Overwatch Council official respectfully asked for instructions. "Commissioner, the chest has arrived." Fan Xian made a sound of acknowledgement and walked to the side of the chest. The outside of the chest was wrapped in willow twigs, but the inside seemed to be made of metal. All the officials were puzzled, wondering what this lord was up to. Even Governor Shui Qing and Inspector Dai Siqing were interested. They all walked forward to see what treasure was hidden in the chest. Fan Xian took out the key from his clothes and opened the lid. Just like Su Wumei, who had seen the contents of the chest for the first time, after a silver light flashed inside the shed, all of the officials' eyes stared straight. Silver. Inside was full of dazzling silver. Who knew how many silver ingots were neatly stacked in the chest? In reality, the value of the gifts in the earlier chests was not necessarily any less than this large chest of silver ingots. However, since ancient times people were used to using silver. Suddenly seeing so many silver ingots appear in front of everyone, the visual impact was too stimulating. After a long time, everyone reluctantly pulled their gazes back from the chest. They all looked at Fan Xian, waiting to see his next step in his performance. "This chest of silver followed me from Jingdo to Jiangnan. In the future, no matter where I become an official, I will always bring this chest of silver," Fan Xian said evenly. "What? It is to tell the various officials that I have plenty of silver. I'm not afraid of everyone laughing at me, but I, Fan Anji, was born with a golden spoon in my mouth. Anyone who wants to use silver as a weapon to bribe me should quickly give up on this thought." He continued coldly, "Coming to Jiangnan this time, I will investigate the matter of everyone's silver. I will not interfere with any political matters. However, if anyone still dares to bribe, corrupt, or bully the people, don't blame me for being ruthless." There was a wise person who knew the terrifying consequences of corrupt governance, so he brought hundreds of coffins. He claimed that even if he had to kill all the corrupt officials, he had to stop this evil trend, Fan Xian faintly said. Fan Xian faintly said, "I am not a person who likes to kill, so I will not bring a coffin. I will only bring silver." The officials were silent and terrified. "There is a total of 138,880 liang of silver in the chest. I will say something in front of all the officials and the elders who have come to welcome me. Jiangnan is rich and populous. I cannot guarantee how much of this silver will be used on the people's lives, but I can guarantee that when I leave Jiangnan, the silver in the chest will not be an extra liang." Fan Xian swept his gaze across the officials' eyes and said, "I hope all of you will think of this." After finishing this show, the welcoming party on the dock temporarily came to an end. Fan Xian sat back in his chair and felt goosebumps rise on his arms and his sleeves. He was secretly glad that he hadn't blurted out some bottomless abyss or minefields or other bold words earlier. In the afternoon in Suzhou, the study of the governor's manor was completely silent. First-level official, Governor Shui Qing of Jiangnan, sat in the grand wooden chair in the middle with a smile on his face. Beside him sat two advisors who had followed him for many years. One of the advisors shook his head and sighed, "Who would have thought that this imperial envoy is indeed a troublemaker?" The other advisor furrowed his brows and said, "It is very unwise. Sir Fan Jr. has completely swept away the face of the Jiangnan officials. Although, given his status, he is not afraid of this matter, it still seems he is not mature enough." Shui Qing smiled slightly and said, "You two also feel that his showing off is a bit artificial?" The two advisors looked at each other and nodded. Governor Shui sighed and said, "Young people always have more of a desire to perform." The advisor carefully asked, "What do you think of this, Sir Fan Jr.?" Shui Qing was slightly startled. He thought for a moment and then said, "A smart person, a very smart person. He can be made friends, can be deeply acquainted." The advisor was a bit surprised, wondering why this was different from the previous conclusion. Shui Qing smiled self-mockingly and said, "So what if it's artificial? How many people in this world can see the scene at that time? How could those officials in the library of Jingdo know the true situation during this month? Rumors are, in the end, rumors. When people pass them on from mouth to mouth, they will always, consciously or unconsciously, adjust the truth to suit their own inclinations. Sir Fan Jr.'s reputation among the people is very good. When the people spread this matter, they spared no effort. Because of their love for him, even if Sir Fan Jr. had done something inappropriate in this matter, it would be erased and ignored by those words. As for the scene of him not fearing the accumulated abuses of officialdom and berating an official to his face, naturally, they would write a great deal more. Ha! The governor smiled happily and said, hiding 100,000 liang in a chest and taking a boat down to Suzhou. Before long, it will probably be another story of praise in the Qing court. The people from the Overwatch Council are indeed clever. The other advisor was puzzled and said, since he is a clever person, there are clearly better ways to resolve today's matter. Why did Sir Fan Jr. have to choose such an intense and absurd method? Governor Xueqing glanced at him with a not-quite-there smile. What do you know? He closed his mouth and did not continue to explain. There were some things that even his closest advisors should not know. Fan Xian had exposed his knife and sword and offended an entire road of officials. Wasn't this also an expression of sincerity to him, the governor? The fact that he had taken the initiative to say he wanted to live in Hangzhou showed that he understood the tastes of officialdom. After scaring these officials, when the imperial envoy was in Jiangnan in the future, the officials would not surround the imperial envoy. He, the governor, would still be the #1 figure. Xueqing suddenly thought of another matter and involuntarily furrowed his brows. His opinion of Fan Xian rose a notch. This young powerful official was showing off today. It was probably not as simple as expressing sincerity to him. From the spring examinations to Jiangnan, it looked like Fan Xian wanted to offend all the officials under heaven. These 2 years, the officials in court had seen clearly that Fan Xian wasn't even willing to take care of his father-in-law's old relationship. Was he going to be a lonely official? As the emperor's trusted aide, Xueqing had many eyes and ears in court. Of course, he knew that the rumors about Fan Xian's past were true. Thinking of Fan Xian's identity, he immediately understood why he stubbornly insisted on being a lonely official. This was to guard against taboo. Xueqing sighed and shook his head. He thought to himself that everyone was a hard worker. It looked like he should properly interact with this young Commissioner Fan in Jiangnan. The warm afternoon sun slightly dispelled some of the coldness of early spring. The people of Suzhou were drinking tea and chatting in tea houses. The people of Suzhou were too rich. They were so rich that they had too much leisure time. They liked to spend it in tea houses, particularly since such a big thing had happened in the city. Their saliva and tea were boiling in the tea houses. Everyone was discussing the imperial envoy who had just arrived, the world-famous Commissioner Fan. Did you hear? Those officials' faces are all green with fright, a middle-aged merchant chuckled. A middle-aged merchant chuckled. The commoners were always happy to see the officials being humiliated. Another person shook his head and sighed. Unfortunately, it's still a big matter turned into a small matter and a small matter into nothing. I think that if the imperial envoy truly cares for the people, he should capture all those corrupt officials and throw them into prison. Nonsense. The middle-aged merchant in front of him laughed disdainfully. The officials are all in prison. Who will try the case? Who will manage it? Sir Fan Jr. is a genius with deep foresight. How could he be like us commoners who don't know what's important? This move is called striking the mountain to scare the tiger. Just watch, the good show is yet to come. I think the Jiangnan Road officials are really going to have a taste of the Overwatch Council's power this time. The person nodded and replied, that is true. Fortunately, the emperor is wise and sent the commissioner to Jiangnan. The merchant lowered his voice and smiled. It should be the emperor's wisdom to have given birth to the commissioner. The tea table immediately quieted down. A moment later, a wave of light laughter exploded with tacit understanding. In the end, the merchant said, earlier my shop assistant went to the docks to take a look. The commissioner was truly ruthless. Those subordinates who went down the river on the big boats were whipped 30 times. The person across from him replied as if it was a matter of course, this is the right thing to do. Although it was the subordinates who hid Sir Fan Jr. from receiving the silver, the crime was already there. Now that the silver has been returned and the gift list has been burned, it is not easy to punish them. However, if the subordinates are not severely punished, how could the Jiangnan Road officials be convinced? Earlier I also went to take a look. Tsk, the whipping was truly ruthless. With one lash, it seemed to take off a few pieces of flesh. The bloody mess was very scary. In a salt merchant's manner that the imperial envoy was temporarily staying in, wretched cries rose and fell in a side room. Fan Xian looked at a few trusted aides who had been lined up in order and looked at the whip marks on their backs. He placed the ointment in his hand on the table and laughingly scolded, "I'm not going to apply it for you guys. I sympathize with my subordinates, yet you guys are here wailing. When you were whipped, why didn't you cry out more wretchedly? Aren't you afraid of other people's suspicions?" Su Wenmao turned his head miserably and said, "I have to gain face for you. Of course it's not good to cry out after being whipped a few times. However, sir, is there a problem with your ointment? Why does it hurt more the more I apply it?" Fan Xian smiled and said, "The whip is so light. Of course I have to let you guys suffer a bit at this time." He rose and left, shaking his head as he walked. He thought to himself that what Wanli said was sometimes correct. He was not a good official, so he was embarrassed to ask his subordinates to be honest officials. It was not easy to twist the upper beam to the lower beam. To be continued. If you want to know what happened afterwards, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 347. That afternoon, Fan Xian cordially received the relevant officials of the Palace Treasury Transport Company in his temporary residence. The other officials of Jiangnan Road were scared by him and didn't dare to get close, but these Palace Treasury officials were his direct subordinates. They couldn't hide, so they could only brace themselves and come see him. Fortunately, Fan Xian had long shed his skin and bones as cold as by the riverside. He laughed and said a few words. He then set a date for departure and amiably saw the officials out of the manor. For a moment the officials of the palace treasury were confused. In the evening there was a welcoming banquet prepared in Jiangnan restaurant. Due to the same reason the officials of the counties along the Jiangzhou side only sat for a while and then retreated. In any case they had performed their etiquette. Furthermore, the rules of the court did not allow them to stay in Suzhou forever. It was easy to find a reason to stay as far away from Commissioner Fan of the Overwatch Council as possible. Only the officials of the Suzhou government could not go. They looked at the head seat with fear. In the head seat, Fan Xian, Jiangnan Governor Xue Qin, and the inspector drank and chatted merrily. The atmosphere was harmonious. The Suzhou Zhizhou present had a pained expression and forced a smile. It was the Hangzhou Zhizhou who knew that the imperial envoy would be stationed in Hangzhou in the future, so he thickened his face and stayed behind. Under the murderous gazes of the Suzhou officials, he endlessly flattered Fan Xian and the governor. This Hangzhou Zhizhou was truly a shrewd person. He was not afraid of Fan Xian's methods of turning his back on him. He was certain that currying favor with his superiors, no matter when or where, it would not be wrong. After the banquet they first sent the governor onto the official sedan. The two of them then decided to go to the Xue Manor to harass him. Only then did Fan Xian raise his hands in farewell to the officials in the building and climb into his own carriage. His personality was still the same as before. He liked to sit in carriages and not in sedan. The curtains in front of the carriage were not blocked. Suzhou's night wind blew in, and the clear sound of silk and bamboo entered his ears. Jiangnan was rich and populous. The rich merchants kept many excellent performers. The brothels in Suzhou and Hangzhou were also famous for doing well. Fan Xian gently slapped his cheeks and allowed the night wind to blow away the slight warmth on his face. Although the zhenqi in his body had recovered a lot, his alcohol tolerance had not returned. After being advised by the officials he felt a bit dizzy. The Hangzhou address has been decided. What about Suzhou? He asked quietly as he half closed his eyes to rest. Shi Chanli sat beside him and thought for a while before saying, "Sangwon won't arrive until the middle of the month. Student. Fan Xian smiled. He opened his eyes and sighed. "It's really hard on you to do all this. Endure it for another year or two. You know I don't have many trustworthy people around me." He and Shi Chanli were talking about Baoyue Brothel's grand plan to go south. The business of the brothel was not only the fastest way for money to flow back, but it often had unexpected uses such as intelligence. While Fan Xian was in Jingdou, he had already decided to open his family's brothel in Jiangnan. Although he would certainly encounter a great deal of resistance, given his status and power, it should not be a problem for him to make a name for himself within a year. Shi Chanli asked, "Sir, can this matter be delayed? After all, you are leaving for the palace treasury the day after tomorrow. There is no backbone in Suzhou. If you want to choose a location to buy a building and a girl at this time, I'm afraid I won't be able to control the situation. If I'm not here, there is still the third prince." A naughty smile flashed through the corner of Fan Xian's eyes. "Tomorrow I will pick a few old teachers for the third prince. Although he will always come with me to Hangzhou, he will still stay in Suzhou during this time. Don't forget what kind of business this prince does in Jingdo. Don't look at how young he is very clear about the ways inside. With the prince coming out, the governor can't say anything. You can buy whichever building you want. As for those popular girls, throw some more silver at them. How can they not succeed? With the prince supporting you from behind, you don't have to worry about the brothel owners in Jiangnan playing dirty with you. Since they are playing in the open, it is just a show of throwing silver at people. Are you still worried that you don't have silver? Shi Chanli was dumbfounded. He thought to himself, the emperor wanted you to educate the third prince. Did you originally want to use the third prince to open a brothel in Jiangnan? This was too disgraceful and unfilial. Immediately after, he thought of another thing. Why did Sir have so much silver on him? The 138,880 taels of silver in the chest could not be moved. Then he must still have a lot of silver notes in his pocket for him to speak like this earlier. Thinking of this, Shi Chanli said worriedly, if we were to sell it openly, the Jiangnan brothel would certainly take the opportunity to raise the price. The money spent would be like flowing water. Who knows how many days it would last? At this time the carriage rolled along the clean stone path in Suzhou. Passing through a door, it came to a bustling commercial area during the day. Even at night, the shop signs on this street were still incomparably bright. Suzhou was the largest port for the palace treasury's products to be exported. In terms of prosperity and commercial development, other than Dongyi, there was no other city in the world that could compare to it. Buying glass here was 4/5 cheaper than buying it in northern Qi, but Fan Xian knew the cost of something like glass. He knew that the Suzhou merchants had long earned their fill over the decades. Other than the various shop signs, the most eye-catching thing was a green cloth that would pop up not far away. What was eye-catching was not that the green cloth was dyed with a fluorescent material that glowed in the night. Rather, it was that the place where the green cloth was displayed was not a restaurant. The green cloth was painted with a pattern similar to the Fan family crest. On this street there were 8 or 9 money houses. Fan Xian's carriage slowly moved along the quiet street. When it passed by a slightly new piece of green cloth, he pointed at the door of the money house and said in a low voice, "Even if you die of poverty, don't come to this money house." Hearing these words, Shi Chanli went to take a look. He only got a general idea. After thinking for a while, he said curiously, "Merchants? Never heard of it. It's not Taiping Money House. Who would dare to have dealings with them?" Fan Xian smiled and didn't say anything. At that time, the world's commerce was gradually developing. It became difficult for large transactions to use silver to do so. Thus, banknotes gradually became something that merchants liked. Organizations such as banks and money houses also began to show their importance. However, for an existence like a money house, the most important thing to people was credibility and confidence. Thus, in this Jianghu there was no problem of big fish eating small fish. After decades, there were still only a few big fish in the world. The 3 biggest fish were called the Qin Kingdom, Northern Qi, and Dongyi. The banknotes issued by the Qin Kingdom and Northern Qi were official banknotes. Of course, they were the most trustworthy. However, the officials in court did not realize the importance. Exchanging official banknotes was very troublesome, and the flexibility was appalling. Thus, other than storing money in coffins, most merchants would choose the Taiping Money House that Dongyi had opened. Although the Taiping Money House was Dongyi's capital, it was rumored that some nobles in northern Qi and the Qin Kingdom had also invested in it. Thus, no matter how the 3 countries fought and killed each other, miraculously, the money house itself was not affected. After 20 or 30 years, the Taiping Money House had a first-rate reputation, abundant capital, and thorough service. It also had the secret protection of the upper echelons of each country. Naturally, it became the largest money house in the world. There was no other. The Taiping Money House was the largest in the world. Even on this street, the Taiping Money House had opened 3 branches. Fan Xian glanced coldly at the green cloth floating by outside the carriage and said, "Withdraw money from the Taiping Money House." Shi Chanli made a noise of acknowledgement. "Withdraw as much as you want," Fan Xian calmly said. "Before I leave I'll give you my seal and number. Don't be so stingy and reluctant to spend money." Withdraw as much as he wanted? How could there be such a good thing in this world? Shi Chanli smiled and said, "Is this Taiping Money House opened by you?" Fan Xian scolded with a smile, "If I had that much money, everything would be easily solved. Why would I need to interact with those people?" Shi Chanli was his trusted aide and knew he was talking about Northern Qi. After a moment of nervousness he didn't reply. However, he immediately thought of Northern Qi and the palace treasury. He didn't expect the palace treasury to open in a few days. If Fan Xian wanted to help Xia Qifei and the Ming family win the bid, then he would need a terrifying sum of money. He furrowed his brows and said, "Sir, the palace treasury urgently needs money. If it's not convenient, I think we should delay the matter of opening the shop." Fan Xian shook his head. "The amount of silver you need to transfer and the amount of silver the palace treasury needs to win the bid are not of the same order of magnitude, so you don't have to worry. As for opening the shop, it needs to be done quickly. First, it is to take advantage of the fact that the prince is still in Suzhou. He is probably also interested, so it will be convenient. Secondly, he thought of his father who was still in Jingdou and couldn't resist smiling. Secondly, the Jiangnan girls are still waiting for the Fan family to save them. The earlier we can do it, the better." These words were not false. Ever since he had set the rules for Baoyue brothel in Jingdou and Lady Shi Qing'er had supplemented them, although the girls of Baoyue brothel were still in the flesh business, their lives were much better than before. Their commission was less and there were regular visits from doctors. They had also signed a new labor contract. The girls of Baoyue brothel were truly grateful to Fan Xian. Once the influence spread, the entire brothel industry in Jingdou began to show a healthy and upward feeling of the rising sun. If Baoyue brothel could truly open a chain in Jiangnan, presumably the Jiangnan ladies would also be very happy with the arrival of Imperial Envoy Fan. Returning to the Hua garden that the salt merchant had happily given up, Fan Xian accepted the hot soup Cici handed him and drank it. Other than sobering up, it also warmed his body. He bent over the table and read a few council reports from the council. He found that the world was peaceful and relaxed. He first let Cici go into the inner room to sleep while he walked out. Putting on a thick jacket, he rubbed his hands and knocked on the door of another room. Not far behind him, the tiger guards and 6th bureau swordsmen quickly hid in the darkness. The door opened with a creak, revealing Haitang's still sleepy face. Without waiting for Haitang to speak, Fan Xian said in surprise, "Sleeping so early?" Haitang smiled slightly and invited him into the room. She turned the smokeless oil lamp a little brighter and quietly said, "This merchant's family is very extravagant, and this bed is also very comfortable. I thought that you would probably get drunk at the welcoming banquet tonight, so I went to sleep first." Fan Xian focused his gaze and found that the clothes the girl was wearing were not very thick. It was only a very plain robe. He furrowed his brows and said, "Wear more. Although your realm is high, the natural cold is not something to be trifled with." Haitang couldn't be bothered to pay attention to him. She yawned and half-propped her chin up on the bed. "What's the matter? Hurry up and say it." Fan Xian paused and forgot what he had come to say. Last night, after he had boarded the Jingdou ship, Haitang had disappeared without a trace. It wasn't until the afternoon that she mysteriously appeared in the garden. Had he just come to confirm whether or not she was there? Or was he already used to chatting with this northern Chi Saint girl like an old friend? "It is very difficult for me to get drunk." Fan Xian was a quick-witted person. He smiled slightly at Haitang's first words. "You know I am afraid of death and cowardly. Other than in front of people I can completely trust, I won't get drunk." "So you can only get drunk at home?" Haitang opened her bright eyes and asked curiously. Fan Xian shook his head. "Other than being able to completely trust myself, I also have to trust that when I get drunk, the people beside me have enough power to protect my safety." Haitang smiled. She knew what he meant. She immediately pitied him and said tenderly, "Don't tell me that in your entire life, you've only gotten drunk in Shangjing's Pines and Crane's Tavern, once." That time in Shangjing, Northern Qi, in front of Haitang, Fan Xian had gotten wildly drunk until he passed out. He had also been drugged with an aphrodisiac and fallen into the greatest trap since his rebirth. Fan Xian said angrily, "You still have the face to bring it up, of course." He couldn't see the sympathy in Haitang's eyes. He said coldly and arrogantly, "When I was young I often got drunk. Don't think too highly of yourself." Haitang smiled. "At that time that blind master was always by your side?" Fan Xian didn't reply. Haitang suddenly furrowed her brows. "Then, the legend of you getting drunk and writing thousands of poems in the Qing royal palace, was that also false?" Fan Xian waved his hand. He didn't want to continue this uninteresting topic with her. He directly asked, "Has the silver arrived yet?" Haitang uninterestedly sighed and sat up. She looked into his eyes and nodded seriously. "Since August, His Majesty has already begun making arrangements. You don't have to worry." Fan Xian laughed at himself. "What can I do if I don't worry?" I can't have the old man take out the silver from the national treasury for my own use. Speaking of which, Haitang furrowed her brows, you actually brought over 100,000 taels of silver with you, isn't that too stupid? I don't believe that you're just trying to show off at the riverside. Fan Xian thought that he had no choice but to make this arrangement. How could he tell her the inside story? He couldn't tell anyone about it. It's just some useless silver. What's there to be afraid of? You've been an official for less than 2 years, and yet you have so much silver with you. Haitang smiled faintly. Including you and your father's salary, I'm afraid it would take over 100 years to save up so much silver. How do you explain this to the officials? Fan Xian shook his head. Don't forget, the Fan clan is a large clan. The clan property is where the money comes from. Oh? A large clan that can easily take out so much silver. Don't tell me they don't run amok? Be careful or the Imperial Censorate will report you. So be it. Fan Xian smiled. Even if the clan doesn't have that much money, the palace knows that my business has been big these past 2 years. They won't suspect me of anything. A brothel and a dozen bookstores, can you make that much silver? Haitang asked doubtfully. Don't look down on my second son's ability to amass wealth. Of course, I've been an official in court for 2 years and have received a lot of benefits. Basically, it's all buried in that chest. You have to say, if I didn't have the old man to help me move it out of the treasury, I really wouldn't have been able to exchange it for such an orderly amount of silver when I leave the capital. Fan Xian smiled. After the matter is over, the so-called bribe silver will be mixed with this clean silver. The court won't be able to say anything about me. In order to gather enough silver, I searched all the liquid silver in the businesses under my name clean. Right now Jingdo is really an empty shell. Only now did Haitang know that he had this plan. She couldn't help but feel a bit disdainful. Given your position, why are you so concerned about cleaning up the bribe silver? Mountain people have their own uses. Then you put all the silver in the chest and can't move it in front of everyone's eyes. What will you do when you need money in the future? Fan Xian smiled slightly. Don't I have you? Furthermore, there is also that adorable emperor. This time, the silver he sent into Taiping Money House is not a small amount. I'm sure he won't mind if I take a few to spend. Haitang paused. Only now did she know that when it came to fighting and scheming, she was not below Fan Xian. It could be said that when it came to stealing and playing tricks to earn money, there was a large gap between them and the Fan family. In the next few days she would have to keep a closer eye on them. The scene was truly ridiculous. Fan Xian and Haitang, two figures recognized by the world as elegant and otherworldly, were quietly talking about silver, banknotes, money houses, money laundering, and other topics that reeked of money on a gloomy night in their room. In the main hall of the manor, bright candles hung high. The large chest of silver that represented the spirit of Fan Xian's Jiangnan political declaration was openly displayed there. The people walking by couldn't resist glancing at the chest. However, there were guards everywhere and swordsmen of the 6th Bureau protecting it in the dark. Although hundreds of thousands of liang of silver was enough to make one's eyes drool, if one wanted to steal this chest of silver, the great bandits or greedy thieves might as well just charge into the government treasurer's office and steal the official silver. That way the chances of success would probably be higher. The chest was open like this, naked and exposed in front of everyone. Inside the chest was a snow-white silver ingot. It gave off a soul-sucking and soul-devouring light. Faintly, a dangerous coldness seeped out from inside. After a few more days, the imperial envoy Fan Xian, who had stirred up all of Jiangnan Road, finally left Suzhou. Taking his people and subordinates, they traveled on the official road toward where the Palace Treasury Transport Company was located in the southwest. Although the third prince was still in Suzhou, the officials all let out a big breath. They thought that as long as Commissioner Fan was not there, how difficult would it be to fool a child? The third prince did not know what these officials were thinking. Otherwise, given his sinister nature and his temper that was about to explode, who knew what new tricks he would come up with? These 2 days, he had been angry in his heart because Fan Xian had not taken him to the palace treasury. The palace treasury was once the property of the Yi family. It indirectly supported the Qing kingdom's stability and ability to expand. It could even be said that the Qing kingdom relied on the palace treasury to support itself. Thus, that place naturally became the most heavily guarded place in the Qing court. The restrictions were even stricter than in the royal palace. In the legends of the people, it was as if the 5 thunders patrolled the outside and the gods guarded the center. To be able to go to the palace treasury to see the scenery was the lifelong wish of countless commoners. Although the third prince had the honor of a prince, he was still very curious about the palace treasury. Without the emperor's special permission, a prince did not have the right to go to the palace treasury. He had thought that following Fan Xian to Jiangnan this time, he would be able to fulfill his wish. Unexpectedly, Fan Xian had left him in Suzhou. With a slap, a middle-aged scholar who looked like a learned scholar, crawled out in a wretched state, crying and howling uncontrollably. The third prince followed him out and cursed viciously, "Father wants Fan Xian to be the teacher. He dares to run. I dares to kick people." The servants in the manor were as silent as cicadas in winter. The imperial envoy had left. Who would dare to offend this young master? He even dared to kick the teacher the governor's manor had carefully invited. If they said a few more words, wouldn't they be dead for sure? The third prince was angry. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw a person sneakily walking down the corridor. He quickly stopped him and walked over to take a look. He found it was Fan Xian's trusted disciple, Shi Chanli. Although he was arrogant and ruthless for Fan Xian's sake, he couldn't do anything to Shi Chanli. Curious, he asked, "Where are you going, Sir Shi?" Shi Chanli seemed to jump in fright and said fawningly, "Greetings, Your Highness. I'm going out for a walk." The third prince paused and said, "I haven't seen any fun places in Suzhou. You have to take me." Shi Chanli begged for mercy. "Your Highness, the teacher has strict orders. He has assigned all the homework for the next few days. If you don't finish it, what will happen? Besides, letting teacher know that I brought Her Highness out to play is a great sin." The third prince furrowed his thin brows and huffed coldly. "If you want to do it, then do it. Only—" He looked at Shi Chanli's flickering gaze and smiled. "I have to tell you, if you're not going with the teacher to the palace treasury, what are you doing in Suzhou? And where are you planning to go at this time?" Shi Chanli was stumped by these words. He hesitated for a moment, wanting to say something, but then stopped. A moment later, he lowered his voice and smiled bitterly. "It's not like Your Highness doesn't know. I am a pitiful student to be ordered by my teacher to do that trade." The third prince's eyes lit up. Probingly he asked, "Is Baoyue brothel going to open in Suzhou?" Shi Chanli covered his mouth in surprise. It was as if he was annoyed that he had spilled the beans. The third prince chuckled coldly, but his heart was blooming with joy. He thought to himself that if he could resume his old trade in Suzhou, it would be much happier than sitting in this manner. His shares in the brothel in Jingdo had been forcefully taken by Fan Xian. Now that he knew Fan Xian was a practical person with a superficial sense of morality, how could the third prince miss this opportunity? Shi Chanli looked at the third prince's reaction and admired his teacher's meticulous planning. Chapter 348. The world was big, but not as big as the monarch. When the monarch was not present, the teacher was great. When the teacher was far away, the gentleman was the greatest. The so-called gentleman was not the opposite of a petty person. Rather, it was a proper son of the monarch. In other words, the third prince, who was still a petty person, was the greatest in Suzhou, so Shi Chanli was not worried. After pretending to be distressed for a moment, he finally agreed to the prince's request. The third prince fiercely ordered the old nannies and eunuchs who had just hurried over from the palace to stay in the manor. He casually brought Shi Chanli and a few guards out of the manor. Seeing the young master disappear through the door, the eunuchs and nannies all trembled in fear. They thought that the commissioner was not here, and the world was about to turn upside down. They couldn't resist silently praying for the commissioner to hurry back. They had no idea that Fan Xian was going to use the third prince's identity to suppress them. It was rare for the third prince to have such an opportunity to have fun, so he was not in a hurry. The group of people changed clothes and pretended to be rich young masters on a trip. Shi Chanli fearfully was given the role of the older brother. Naturally, the third prince was the younger brother. Sitting in the carriage, they circled around Suzhou and saw some good scenery. They also gathered on the lake to look at a few pleasure boats. The third prince's interest finally weakened. The weather is too cold and the girls are wearing too much. How can I see the romance? The noble young master furrowed his brows. Let's go pick a good place first. I have to put in a lot of effort for the business that Fan Xian wants to do. Otherwise, if I say you're taking me around blindly, I'm afraid he'll be angry. Shi Chanli thought to himself that it should have been like this a long time ago. The problem of choosing a location was easy to solve. In any case, it was the busiest place in Suzhou. The group of people desperately dove in and found the busiest street. They looked around and found that many brothels had opened. It was already a developed and familiar place. Thus, they decided on a general direction. Then, in this large area, they picked the clearest building to look at. They looked at the most imposing one. This group of people easily found their target. It was a restaurant that took up the best position on the street. It was an extravagant 3-story building. The building was wide, and behind it, one could faintly see the walls of the courtyard. It took up a lot of space. The third prince waved his hand and said, "Stop looking. I think this is the best location." Sher Chanli's heart was filled with joy. He had been managing the Baoyue brothel in the capital for a while now, but he never thought that picking a location for a store with a prince would be as efficient as this. With money and power, he did things efficiently and efficiently. But as he stood at the entrance of the restaurant, he thought of something and said in a low voice, "This place is too eye-catching. I think there must be someone behind it." The third prince was taken aback and asked, "Who in this world has a more powerful background than my family?" Sher Chanli opened his mouth wide and didn't say anything for a while. He forcefully swallowed the mouthful of blood and carefully said, "What if there are people from the governor's manor or the inspector's family? Although your highness doesn't care much, you still have to give these officials some face." Although the third prince was young, he was not a muddle-headed person. He thought that this was indeed the case. Governor Xueqing was not someone he could easily offend. Besides, his group of people had come thousands of li from Jingdo. If they wanted to steal the face of the Jiangnan officials, it would probably not look good. But he looked at the location of the restaurant. The more he looked, the more his heart itched. The more he looked, the more beautiful it seemed. He furrowed his thin brows and thought for a while. He then said, "We still have to ask. If we let go of this place with good feng shui, even if Fan Xian doesn't feel bad about it, I will feel bad for many days." This group of people had already stood outside the restaurant for a while. Just by looking at the layout, they blocked the entrance of the restaurant. They didn't eat and only sniffed. Although Suzhou was mixed with all sorts of people, there was no such thing. The group of people pointed and whispered at the entrance of the restaurant. They immediately attracted the attention of the people on the street. However, seeing the other party's bright clothing and powerful guards, they did not look like Jianghu figures. Thus, the merchants on the street restrained their gossiping hearts. Only the shopkeeper of the restaurant had no choice but to walk out. Piling on a professional smile, he asked, "Everyone, would you like to come in and try our signature dishes? Our Bamboo Garden Restaurant and Jiangnan Restaurant are known as the second floor of Suzhou. We do indeed have some pretty good food." He saw that the people in front of the building seemed to be foreigners, and their statuses should not be ordinary, so he responded carefully. This Bamboo Garden Restaurant had its own background, but businessmen naturally had a clever heart. He only talked about business, and his words did not have the slightest intention of blaming the other party for blocking the entrance of the building. Sher Chanli was surprised. He smiled warmly and said, "I am truly sorry. I was distracted for a moment. Please don't blame me, shopkeeper." The shopkeeper quickly said, "You are too polite." The third prince was impatient to take things so slowly and said, "Let's go in and sit and talk." He led the group of people into the restaurant. At the end he threw out a few words, "Shopkeeper, arrange for a quiet room. There are some things I would like to ask for advice on." The shopkeeper was surprised. He thought, "Your elder brother hasn't said anything yet, why did I speak first?" Sher Chanli coughed a few times to cover it up and followed him into the restaurant. The group had yet to sit down in a room in the restaurant when the shopkeeper personally came in to greet them. The third prince didn't waste words and asked straightforwardly, "Shopkeeper, are you selling this restaurant or not?" The shopkeeper was quite surprised today. He thought to himself that this young master's tone was not small at all. However, he had dealt with many difficult matters in this life. He smiled humbly and said, "Young master, the business of this restaurant is quite good. The owner doesn't seem to have any intention of turning the tables." "May I ask for the owner's name?" Sher Chanli was secretly angry at the prince's impatience and changed the subject to ask warmly. The shopkeeper replied neither humbly nor overbearingly, "The owner's surname is Qian." After the shopkeeper left, Sher Chanli furrowed his brows and said, "This is my first time in Suzhou. I have no idea what the relationship is and I don't know who the Qian person is." The third prince stood up and pushed open the window in the room. His expression couldn't help but freeze as if he had seen something strange. Sher Chanli was suspicious and walked behind him to look out the window. For a moment he couldn't help but freeze where he was. Outside the window was the back garden of Zhuyuan Restaurant. In the garden was a flat lake. Although the surface of the lake was not wide, it was quiet and secluded. There were courtyard walls on both sides that separated it from the busy market. The grass in the courtyard was not green, but one could imagine the beautiful scenery of spring. "It really is like..." The two of them opened their mouths and sighed at the same time. The here was, of course, referring to the setup of the back of the building that was very similar to the setup of Baoyue brothel in Jingdo, particularly on the grass. If a few quiet and secluded courtyards were built, they would probably become twins with Baoyue brothel in Jingdo. Looking at the back garden of Zhuyuan restaurant, the two managers of Baoyue brothel were both moved. They had to buy this building. Buy it? The third prince and Shi Chanli spoke at the same time with great tacit understanding. They then chuckled. The rest of the matter was simple. After they returned, they would think of a way to find out the background of this Zhuyuan restaurant. They could only hope that the other party's background was not too powerful. If it involved high-ranking officials, the matter would be more troublesome. The third prince was young, but it was unknown where he got all these size from. If Fan Xizhe was here, I'm afraid he would have to fight a lawsuit with the owner of this restaurant. He would point at their nose and scold them for shamelessly copying their design. Shi Chanli thought about it. Second young master Fan was indeed like this. He couldn't help but burst into laughter. What are you laughing at? The third prince glared at him. My second cousin is even more sinister than my eldest cousin. Of course, neither of them are kind people. They forcefully played the trick of a cicada shedding its carapace. They bullied me because I was young and stole my shares. Don't forget, you also had a part in this. Shi Chanli shrank back and did not dare to reply. The group of them had a meal in the private room and were very impressed with the culinary skills of this restaurant. The third prince even had the thought of hiring the original chef over. After the meal, just as everyone was preparing to leave, they saw the shopkeeper hurriedly walk into the private room. With a face full of sweat, he bowed again. As he wiped away his sweat, he said in a gentle voice, "Dear guests, earlier we talked about buying the building. Could we discuss it again?" The third prince and his group were very strange. This restaurant's business was clearly very good. Furthermore, when they had asked earlier, the other party had clearly been on guard. Why had their attitude suddenly changed so much? Shi Chanli probingly asked, "Shopkeeper, what do you mean?" The shopkeeper laughed dryly and said, "Earlier, the owner heard of this matter and thought that business has not been as good as in previous years. Since there were honored guests who made a bid, they simply let it out. They only hope that the honored guests can give a suitable price. Also, they hope that after the sale, the honored guests can take good care of this building." Shi Chanli became more and more curious. He was just about to ask something when the third prince said with a smile, "Of course, we are also people who do business. Of course, we will take good care of this building. However, you said a suitable price earlier. What kind of price would be suitable?" The private room immediately fell silent. The shopkeeper's eyes froze. He thought to himself, how dare he ask this young master to make a bid just like that? But the owner didn't have any orders. How could he make a bid? Looking at the owner's intentions, he was certainly planning on giving it away with both hands, but the other party didn't seem to notice. Was he going to make a bid himself? The sweat on his forehead seeped faster and faster. His face was red and swollen. It was as if the chilly early spring weather had turned into the middle of the summer. After holding it in for a while, the shopkeeper finally gathered his courage and extended 4 fingers. Shi Chanli paused. The guards in the room paused again. They thought to themselves, 40,000 liang? No matter how famous the lion's head of this place was, it shouldn't be so exorbitant. The shopkeeper saw that the other party didn't respond and felt even more afraid. He quickly pulled back 3 fingers, leaving only his index finger standing pitifully. Shi Chanli almost spat out blood again. This price was really strange. He didn't need to say anything, and in the blink of an eye, it had gone from 40,000 liang to 10,000 liang. After thinking about it, he felt that this price was actually not bad. He nodded and said, "Although 10,000 liang of silver is not much, but..." The shopkeeper's legs went soft and he almost cried. "Mister, you're wrong, you're wrong." Shi Chanli asked in surprise, "How is it wrong?" "It is 1,000 liang." The shopkeeper forced out an innocent smile. "Not 10,000 liang." Shi Chanli swallowed back his third mouthful of blood today. Before he had time to say anything, the third prince had already said, "Bring the contract." Looking at his expression, it seemed that he had a card up his sleeve. The shopkeeper seemed to have long been prepared. He immediately went out to invite a person recognized by the government to enter and began to write the contract. When he wrote down the amount of the transaction, the third prince smiled sweetly and said, 16,000 liang. "I won't take advantage of you. I'll give you an extra 20% of the silver. Presumably your owner won't be willing to sell, so count this 20% as buying medicine for him." Although the third prince was wearing commoner's clothing today, He naturally exuded a noble aura. Although the shopkeeper was greatly surprised, he did not dare to say anything. After writing the contract, the two parties pressed their fingerprints and agreed to settle the transaction tomorrow. Carefully seeing this group of people out of the restaurant, the shopkeeper let out a breath and wiped the cold sweat off his forehead with some fear. After calming his mind, he walked to the third floor and entered a quiet room. He handed the contract in his pocket to a young man. This young man's face was clear and upright, and his eyes were warm and spirited. It was the young master of the Ming family who had appeared at the West Lake restaurant in Hangzhou, Ming Lansher. He accepted the contract and glanced at it. A glimmer of hatred and disappointment flashed through his eyes. With the back of his hand, he slapped the shopkeeper across the face. With a slap, the shopkeeper covered his face and looked fearfully at the young master. He didn't know what he had done wrong. Useless thing. Ming Lansher was angry in his heart, but his expression remained warm. A chill seeped through his words. Even if I wanted you to give me money, you wouldn't be able to. After the family meeting, Ming Lansher had stayed in Suzhou. Suddenly, he heard the shopkeeper say that someone wanted to buy the restaurant. Hearing the other person's description and attire, this successor of the Ming family vaguely guessed something. When the waiter later overheard the name Fan Xizhe, he immediately confirmed the other person's identity. He reacted quickly and prepared to hand over the Bamboo Garden restaurant with both hands. Unexpectedly, the other person did not take any advantage at all. 16,000 liang of silver was not a small amount. Not only did this amount not take advantage of the Ming family, on the contrary, it was much higher than the market price. But how could the Ming family lack this little bit of money? Ming Lansher wanted to take advantage of the fact that the third prince did not know who the owner of the Bamboo Garden restaurant was to be the first to give this restaurant away, even if it was sold cheaply. His main goal was, of course, to curry favor with the other party. If the other party did not acknowledge this small favor in the future, sending this contract to Jingdo would be proof that Fan Xian and the third prince were using their power to forcefully buy private property. In the future, it would be a good reason for the eldest princess to sue the emperor. Who would have thought that the young third prince would not be willing to take advantage of this? Were the rumors in Jingdo false? Was this prince not as greedy and ruthless as the rumors said? Ming Lansher sank into deep thought. He once again realized that the people the family was going to face this time were truly difficult to grasp. He closed his eyes and thought for a moment. In a quiet voice he ordered, "Sir Fan's thoughts are very simple. He wants to open a brothel. Send down the order. No brothel is allowed to sell girls to them, no matter how high the price." The shopkeeper made a sound of acknowledgement and immediately smiled bitterly. "Young master, it's only our own girls that are not for sale. There are many people in this business in Suzhou. Those people would certainly not want to offend Sir Fan. Do they have good girls in their hands?" Ming Lansher smiled slightly. "The good girls are all in our Yuan master's hands. Let them go buy them. How can leftovers attract customers?" A carriage left the Bamboo Garden restaurant. The surrounding merchants did not know that the Ming family had suffered a loss. This most famous restaurant in Suzhou was going to change hands tomorrow. Although Shi Chanli rarely did such shady things, he had finally come to his senses. Furrowing his brows, he said, "Your Highness, it looks like they know your identity." A glimmer of annoyance flashed across the third prince's childish face. "At least they are smart." Shi Chanli thought for a bit and couldn't resist opening his mouth to ask, "Your Highness, the price they offered earlier was 1,000 liang. Why do I have to raise the price myself?" The third prince smiled coldly. "Those who are unaccountably solicitous are hiding evil intentions. After guessing my identity, they wish they could offer up this restaurant with both hands. What about in the future? I'm afraid what they are asking for is not as simple as this restaurant. If they put on a smiling face, of course it would not be good for us to slap them in the face, but there is also no need to put our faces up to be intimate with them. How many people in this world have the right to make friends with me?" Shi Chanli shook his head and said, "I wonder who the owner behind that restaurant is. They sure see the opportunity quickly." The third prince said, "Who cares who they are? If they want me to take advantage of them, they must be someone who wants to take advantage of me. You have to remember this. In the future, when you go out, don't randomly take advantage of others. Be careful of bringing trouble for Fan Xian." Shi Chanli admired the little prince in front of him from the bottom of his heart. He sighed in admiration and said, "Your Highness's words are simple, but they are very deep." The third prince scolded in a clear and childish voice, "Don't flatter me. It's not easy for me to pretend to be a commoner, and now I've been seen through. I don't feel good about it." Shi Chanli thought to himself, you want to buy the restaurant as soon as you enter at such a young age. Is this the tone you should use to hide your identity? He also thought that the prince in front of him was so young, yet he was able to resist not taking advantage of tens of thousands of liang of silver. It seemed to be a far cry from the sinister personality he had when he was in Baoyue brothel. A glimmer of doubt involuntarily flashed through his eyes. He didn't know if the third prince saw his expression, but he continued, Fan Xian once said, whenever I take advantage of the people of this world, in the end, the people of this world will take advantage of the court, and if the court is taken advantage of by others, then I am an idiot who is willing to take out my own silver for others to spend. Shi Chanli was silent. He was secretly worried for his teacher. As a prince, he had established this kind of thinking. Naturally, it was telling this prince that the interests of the court would be his own interests in the future. What did this mean? The crown prince was still on the throne. Not noticing the fear in Shi Chanli's heart, the third prince smiled shyly and said, Teacher once said that a gentleman loves money and takes it in a proper way. The wealth of a ruler is hidden under the heavens. Why take it? Shi Chanli swallowed back the fourth mouthful of blood from his hidden injury. His eyes stared at the green banner that floated endlessly outside the carriage window. Forcefully suppressing the hidden fear in his heart, he pretended he hadn't heard these words. Doing business can be seen as a hobby, the third prince chuckled. The third prince chuckled and said, Old Shi, your courage is much smaller than that of my two cousins. You are not made for doing business. Shi Chanli shifted his body to let the slightly damp clothes on his back breathe in. Smiling bitterly, he replied, Your Highness is right. The third prince called for the carriage to stop and said, We have arrived at the money house. You go to your work. I will return to the manor first. A sinister smile rose to the child's face. No one knew what he was proud of. Watching the carriage leave into the distance, Shi Chanli quietly let out a breath and called for the two guards following him to wait outside. He tidied up his clothes slightly and walked toward a branch of Taiping Money House. Not far behind him was the Zhaoshang Money House that had just opened a few months ago. Although the entrance was cold and deserted, it exuded an aura of nobility. The brand new green banner seemed to be mocking Shi Chanli's pedantry and ignorance. Chicken has 2 yolks. Eat half first. Putting aside what new and surprising things Shi Chanli would encounter in the money house, outside the jurisdiction of the Palace Treasury Transport Company far away from Suzhou, there was a massive group of carriages carrying over 100 people. It was currently moving forward with difficulty in the dark and cold rain of early spring. The Palace Treasury Transport Company was different from the salt and tea companies. First of all, they had more work to do and their profits were greater. Furthermore, they were the only one of the 3 that had actual land. The Palace Treasury produced all kinds of factories and workshops, which required a large amount of land. Ever since the court carved out a piece of land in North Min many years ago, it had gradually become a special region. Its area was larger than a small province and its position was very special. Because they were worried that the Palace Treasury's manufacturing techniques would flow out of the country, the Qing court had put in a lot of effort in the work of protecting the Palace Treasury. For the territory the Palace Treasury governed, the Qing kingdom carried out a completely sealed management. They had set up a total of 5 blockade lines. The outermost line was the local Jiangnan Army and Navy. The inner 4 lines were each set by the Qing military and the Overwatch Council. They monitored each other like a multi-layered fruit cake. As for the transportation lines going out, other than the strict supervision on the surface, there were countless spies planted in them. Countless eyes, whether in the light or in the dark, were watching the Cui family, the Ming family, or some other giant agent merchant. Even though the Qing kingdom had spent so much power, it still could not stop the greedy gazes of other countries. During these decades, countless things had happened to the Palace Treasury, and the Qing kingdom had paid a heavy price for it. First, it had to spend a great deal of silver each year to station troops and defend. Secondly, during these decades, for the sake of the Qing kingdom's prosperity, thousands of lives had been lost. The battle of stealing intelligence and anti-commercial espionage was particularly bloody in this world. It seemed that this battle would never end. The Overwatch Council was the organization that had paid the greatest price in this battle. No one knew how many spies had died in the dark. Fortunately, it ensured that the Palace Treasury was still safe up to this day. The previous head of the 4th Bureau, Yan Ruahai, and the current head of the Jingdou garrison, Qin Heng's brother, Qin Shan, were the people in charge of setting up the defenses. The two of them had once boasted that other than being unable to do anything to a great grandmaster, Not even a mosquito that had been stained with perfume could fly out of the palace treasury's defenses. The group of carriages was undergoing the last inspection. Fan Xian lifted the curtain and looked at the hydraulic machinery by the river not far away. His eyes narrowed slightly. Although it was just some initial and crude industry, the need for power could not be separated from water. A chill appeared in his narrowed eyes. He didn't turn around. Warmly he said, "I brought you in for my own safety. I don't want you to go into the various workshops to watch the excitement. If you are discovered, you should know how serious the consequences are. Even if you are a superior 9th level ace, you may not be able to escape the pursuit of the power here. Furthermore, although my injuries are only half healed, I will still personally act." Behind him, Haitang, disguised as a serving girl, smiled slightly and glanced at Cece beside her. She didn't say anything. "Want a monthly ticket, want a monthly ticket, want a monthly ticket, want a monthly ticket P. Chapter 349. Fan Xian's gaze leaped over the green trees by the side of the road, the endless fields behind the trees, and the flowing river not far away. He moved further and further as if he wanted to see through everything here. Finally, his gaze landed lightly on the large workshop where the river flowed to. There was smoke rising into the air, but it was not the faint green smoke of a farmhouse. Rather, it was black smoke with a familiar smell. Was it a blast furnace? The commoners of this large area had all been recruited by the court to work in the palace treasury. The wages were much higher than growing grain, so there was less interest in taking care of the fields. In the large fertile field, weeds and first rice struggled to grow. It looked somewhat messy. Fan Xian took a deep breath and smelled the fresh scent in the air. He relaxed. It seemed that the environmental pollution here was not as bad as he had thought. Of course, further away in the Tongshan mine, the environment was certainly much worse than here. Looking at the scene in front of him, it seemed that a feeling that had left him for many years gradually returned to his mind. However, that feeling was still gentle and not turbulent. It made him feel somewhat lost. Last September, he had always felt that there was something deep in his heart that he longed for, but he had never been able to find it. Seeing that he was lost in thought, Haitang's hands were in her sleeves like an old man's. She furrowed her brows and looked at the handsome face by the window. She also sank into deep thought. What did this young and powerful official want to do? How do you feel? She saw that Fan Xian's mood was not at peace today and asked with a smile. Fan Xian said quietly, "I should be the one asking you that." Haitang smiled. "It is indeed a rare sight. I had never thought that the Qing Kingdom's palace treasury would be so large. I couldn't even name the things I saw earlier." Fan Xian replied, "Look at it. I don't think you'll be able to go back and make one." A strange light appeared in Haitang's eyes. She smiled and asked, "You have that much confidence in the palace treasury?" Fan Xian was slightly startled. He then quietly replied, "It's not that I have confidence in the palace treasury. It's just that these things should not have appeared in this world. If you can learn to make them just by looking at the outside, then there's something fishy." She seemed to have thought of something and fell silent. After a while she said, "The people in the palace treasury are all trusted aides of Xinyang. How do you plan on taking over?" Fan Xian raised his eyebrows and a faint smile appeared on his face. "No matter whose people they are all mine now." Haitang glanced at him suspiciously. "Do you really intend to fight to the death with him?" Fan Xian fell silent. A moment later, he said in a heavy voice, "This question of yours seems to have come a little too late." Haitang furrowed her brows. "I believe that your mother-in-law isn't a foolish person. She can't see the current situation clearly. Logically speaking, both you and her have the desire to renegotiate and live together. Moreover, with benefits at hand, it seems that neither side wants to see you and her shed all pretense of cordiality. If I don't shed all pretense of cordiality with her, I think you and the Northern Qi Emperor won't be willing to see it." Fan Xian smiled mockingly and said, "Relax, I won't join forces with my mother-in-law again to bully the orphans and widows in the north." Haitang was silent. She didn't know if she believed him or not. Fan Xian wasn't worried about Northern Qi's attitude. After all, as long as the palace treasury existed, the Northern Qi people would have to rely on him. As for what Haitang said earlier, it wasn't without reason. In the eyes of the important figures who played politics, any hatred from the past could be cast aside in the face of a large enough bargaining chip. This was especially true when Fan Xian and the eldest princess had one acting as a lubricant between them. In the eyes of the common people, as long as the eldest princess was willing to make concessions, Fan Xian had no reason not to accept the peace talks. In reality, the eldest princess had already made concessions. After the assassination in Song Mountain, the most beautiful lady in the kingdom of Qing had truly felt Fan Xian's great power. She had written a number of letters and tried in this direction. It was just that Fan Xian hadn't accepted it. Calm your heart. Fan Xian didn't withdraw his gaze from outside the carriage. He said quietly, the eldest princess is already willing to accept the fact that I control the palace treasury, but I don't care. Hai Tang suddenly raised her head. Her bright eyes stared at Fan Xian's back. She didn't know why he would refuse Xinyang's compromise. Fan Xian explained quietly, she wants a 30% share so she can cooperate with me to easily take over the palace treasury. This condition isn't harsh. Hai Tang furrowed her brows. After a moment of silence, she said, not only is it not harsh, it can already be considered a very sincere condition. Originally, from the standpoint of the Qi court, the more you and the eldest princess get into conflict, the better it is for us. But from the standpoint of a friend, I want to give you a piece of advice. When all is said and done, your power was given to you by the Qing royal family. After all, she is your mother-in-law. There is no reason not to accept such a good condition. Fan Xian laughed self-mockingly. Is that so? I don't think so. Perhaps it is from my very bones that I believe that in the matter of the palace treasury, I will not allow anyone to fight with me. Why? Hai Tang still couldn't figure out what he was thinking. This is the business my mother left behind. Fan Xian smiled warmly. I don't have her ability, so I can only be a second-generation ancestor. But I can't ruin this family. The carriage fell silent. After a long time, Hai Tang said quietly, but the present palace treasury still belongs to the Qing court. The court is nothing more than an illusory image, Fan Xian said. What is the court? The emperor? The officials? The empress dowager? Or the common people? He finally said, the key is to see what kind of use the palace treasury will have in my hands and what the silver can be used for. If the court does not use it well, then I will use it on behalf of the court. I will turn this illusory image into the real words of the common people. Hai Tang smiled slightly and said, you're used to playing the role of a saint again. Fan Xian smiled and replied, I told Yan Bingyun before that occasionally playing the role of a saint is a very beneficial supplement to one's spiritual world. After bringing out the secret negotiations he had with the eldest princess and giving Hai Tang a peace of mind, Fan Xian once again fell silent. He looked at the scenery outside the carriage in a daze. The water wheels by the river, the sound of some kind of mechanism in the workshop, and the black smoke rising from the furnaces in the distance were all urging the unknown desire in his heart. Sir, we've arrived. The humble voice of the Palace Treasury Transport Company official roused Fan Xian from his thoughts. He looked with confusion at the two women in the carriage. Only now did he know that the Palace Treasury Transport Company had arrived. He quickly tidied his clothes, lifted the curtain, and jumped out. He jumped out and did not maintain the bearing that an official should have by slowly and steadily walking down. Just this action displayed the strange nervousness and excitement in Fan Xian's heart. After all, he had finally arrived at the Palace Treasury, the place where his mother had made her fortune. How could he still maintain his usual calm? His feet landed on the hard ground. Fan Xian narrowed his eyes slightly and examined everything around him. He found that by the side of the street was a normal yamen. It was not at all the bustling scene of the Great Leap Forward that he had imagined. The street was rather quiet. Although the buildings around him were new and beautiful, it did not seem like a construction site. Perhaps the transport company official responsible for welcoming him from Suzhou had seen this kind of attitude from Jingdou officials many times and carefully explained, the 3 workshops are still far from the yamen. Sir, please rest today. Tomorrow you can go down to inspect. Fan Xian was a bit disappointed. He had planned to go blow glass, weave cotton, and shake hands with the workers today. He didn't think he would have to wait another day. The yamen's doors were all opened. The Palace Treasury Transport Company, as well as the officials of the Overwatch Council responsible for security, split into 2 lines to welcome the Imperial Envoy's arrival. Fan Xian walked in first. Gao De brought a few tiger guards and followed silently behind him. A group of 100 or so people had been settled down in a short amount of time. It looked like the Palace Treasury's operations were still very fast. Hai Tang and Cici were brought to the back residence. In addition to the new servant girls they had bought on the way, the previously quiet manner of the transport company immediately became lively. After the officials paid their respects to Fan Xian, everyone took their places in the yamen and waited for Fan Xian to speak. Fan Xian was not very familiar with the situation in the palace treasury. Furthermore, this was the first time he had opened a yamen, so he felt it was strange. He indicated for Su Wenmao to represent him and say a few useless words. He then had everyone disperse and wait for the yamen to officially open the next day. After returning to the back residence, he didn't have time to familiarize himself with his own official residence. At the first instant, he summoned the Overwatch Council's resident commander of the palace treasury. This official was about 40 years old and had a head of white hair. It looked like the palace treasury's security work was truly exhausting. He indicated for him to sit and didn't waste words. Very straightforwardly he asked, "Tell me the situation." This Overwatch Council official was under the jurisdiction of the 4th Bureau. Since last autumn, he had already received the Yin father and son's secret letter and had long made preparations. Seeing Fan Xian's questions, he quickly dug out everything he knew. Of course, he understood that Commissioner Fan had just come to the palace treasury and did not have many trusted aides. If he wanted to quickly take control of the situation, then he had to find someone trustworthy in the treasury. As an official of the Overwatch Council, he was in a favorable position. Naturally, he had to quickly climb up in order to not waste the opportunity heaven had given him. Fan Xian listened and nodded his head repeatedly. This Overwatch Council official's words and actions were very nimble. In their conversation, he had clearly explained the current situation of the palace treasury. The duties of the 3 workshops and the factions of the various treasurers were all left out. Why has the palace treasury lost so much these years? Fan Xian was born daring. He asked this kind of question openly, not caring at all that it was inconvenient for the Overwatch Council official in front of him to speak. The Overwatch Council official's name was Dan Da. In front of Fan Xian he didn't dare be too daring. How could a lower-level official like him explain the palace treasury's matters in a few words? However, he still said after some deliberation, "Actually, it can't be considered a loss. It's just that the taxes sent to Jingdo have indeed decreased by a few %." Fan Xian smiled bitterly and helplessly. For an old hen that gives birth to a golden chicken to earn less and less each year, what's the difference between that and a loss? I don't know how the previous one managed it. The previous head of the Palace Treasury Transport Company was the cousin of the eldest princess chief strategist, Huang Yi, in Xinyang's Li Palace, Sir Huang Wanshu. When Fan Xian took over the palace treasury, he did not meet with this Sir Huang. The two sides were like fire and water, so he was too lazy to go through the formalities of taking over. They were both single people. Dan Da didn't follow up on his words to belittle the eldest princess. Sincerely he said, "The reason the profits have decreased year after year is because the 3 workshops' expenses are increasing. Including the masters of the workshops, the treasurers take too much. Secondly, there have been some problems with the export channels. The pirates on the sea are too rampant. I don't dare to say too much, but at least 1 or 2 out of 10 halts are lost on the sea. Thirdly, there is the problem of supplies to northern Qi. A few years ago the accounts were too messy. I don't know how much the Chui family took with them, but no one dared to investigate this matter. Fortunately, the commissioner made a move and investigated the Chui family before the year. Just this alone could save the court a lot of losses." Fan Xian listened with interest, but he knew very well in his heart that what pirates? It was all a trick of the Ming family stealing their own goods. He looked at Dan Da wanting to say something but then hesitating. He asked curiously, "What other reasons are there?" Dan Da glanced at him and smiled bitterly. "Also, the council's expenses have increased too quickly these years. As you know, the majority of the council's expenses come directly from the palace treasury. The palace's expenses haven't increased much these years. On the contrary, it's the council that spends too much. Adding on the things I mentioned earlier with this cut, no matter how much the palace treasury can earn money for the court, it's no longer as grand as it was in the past." Fan Xian sucked in a cold breath. He had not thought that the Overwatch Council was also one of the palace treasury's vampires. Thinking about it, the brothers of the 3rd Bureau researched weapons of mass destruction every day, and the crows of the 2nd Bureau searched all over the world for information. No matter how they disguised it, they would always need financial support. Not to mention the 5th and 6th Bureau, these 2 black hole yamens that had no construction and only knew how to destroy and suck in money. Of course, even if these council matters didn't count, he had played in Qin Garden many times. That old cripple had raised so many beautiful women and lived a luxurious life comparable to that of an emperor. He shook his head and smiled bitterly. "Let's not talk about the council's matters for now. If it gets out, it'll be embarrassing. Just investigate those routes." Danda and Su Wenmao, who was behind Fan Xian, couldn't resist laughing. They thought to themselves that the commissioner spoke very directly. I'll take care of the problem of the distribution channels and the problem of the pirates. Fan Xian stared into Danda's eyes. 2 out of the 4 evils have been removed. I just don't understand how the treasures of the 3 large workshops can be mentioned in the same breath as these abuses. Those officials stay in Jiangnan for a long time and are not allowed to leave without permission. It is indeed hard work. It is right that the court gives them a generous salary. Danda didn't dare meet his eyes. He lowered his head and said, the 3 large workshops are responsible for all production in the palace treasury. Those goods were all made by them, so what? Fan Xian smiled coldly. Do they dare to use this to threaten me? Naturally they don't dare to threaten me, Danda replied with a bitter smile. But the court's management of the palace treasury is strict. All the processes, ingredients and recipes are only known to the upper, middle and lower levels of the treasurers. The things in their heads are like the court's silver production machines. As long as they use a bit of cunning, they can reduce the output of the palace treasury. Thus, their positions in the palace treasury have always been special. The court also looks at them differently, so much so that they are somewhat arrogant. Oh. Fan Xian narrowed his eyes in amusement. He thought to himself, even those little helpers from the Yi family had now become technocrats who monopolized and became rich? If this isn't threatening, then what is? Fan Xian increasingly felt that this matter was absurd and funny. He chuckled and said, then how did the eldest princess deal with these treasures in the beginning? Danda thought for a bit and furrowed his brows. The eldest princess only wanted the output not to drop. She basically did her best to satisfy the requests of the treasurers. She also raised their positions very high. Of course, if there were any treasurers who didn't know their limits, the eldest princess would have her methods. 6 years ago, she killed 7 treasurers who caused trouble in one go. From then on, the treasurers learned to silently make a fortune. They don't have a good attitude toward us officials of the same level, but they still don't have any disrespect toward the court. Fan Xian smiled coldly. Arrogant? A very high position. Then the first thing I can do is knock them into the dust. He was a bit angry in his heart. His mother-in-law was indeed not made to be a manager. She had managed such a large enterprise to such a state. No wonder the emperor complained every day, and his father also had headaches about the empty national treasury. Danda jumped in fright. He thought to himself that the commissioner was still young. If a new official took on new responsibilities and calmed his anger with lightning, he would truly offend all of the treasurers. Putting aside the palace treasury's distribution channels, it would probably be difficult to guarantee their own output and the quality of their goods. He raised his hands in a salute and said in a low voice, Sir, please think carefully. There is no harm in responding to them with a soft heart and then slowly planning. I can't plan slowly. 10,000 years is too long. I have to seize every moment. In 10 days, I have to return to Suzhou to preside over the opening of the palace treasury to welcome the bids. If I don't beat the dissatisfied people in the palace treasury into submission in these 10 days, how will you manage things in the future? I don't have the interest to come to this place every day. Danda said with a pained expression. This matter is not easy to deal with. Even if we beat the treasurers into submission on the surface, they will secretly do something in the workshop. They don't even need to do anything to lower the palace treasury's output. If we investigate, we won't be able to find anything. In the end, I'm afraid this responsibility will still have to be shouldered by you. Fan Xian somewhat admired this person's straightforward attitude. The atmosphere of the Overwatch Council officials was indeed much better than that of the Jiangnan Road officials. He waved his hand to stop the other party's admonition and smiled. Don't be afraid. After killing Butcher Zhang, do we have to eat furred pigs? Danda and Su Wenmao paused. They didn't know where the commissioner got his confidence from. The treasurers were in charge of production. This was not something the Overwatch Council was good at. Suddenly Su Wenmao's mind moved. He remembered that the palace treasury had once been the property of the Yi family, and he was a descendant of the Yi family. Did the commissioner have his own way? Fan Xian didn't explain anything. He only had them prepare for the true opening of the yamen tomorrow. He himself went to the rear courtyard and ate 2 bowls of porridge unhappily. He then sincerely invited Haitang to walk with him to the 3 large workshops at night. A subordinate had already helped him get a pass. Even if he didn't reveal his identity at night, there shouldn't be any problems. The reason he had called Haitang to go with him was not because he was kind and wanted to extend the glory of the palace treasury to northern Qi. It was purely because he needed a powerful bodyguard like Haitang. The rooster crowed and the sky turned white. A shadow floated by the back wall of the Palace Treasury Transport Company's manor. Fan Xian and Haitang had finished a night of exploration and returned to the study. Fan Xian's face was heavy. He furrowed his brows and said, "Singing every night, corrupt management, are these 2 words?" Haitang was still immersed in shock. Tonight, she had followed Fan Xian around the 3 large workshops. Although she hadn't come into contact with the military or anything like that, she was still shocked by what she had seen and heard. So, cotton was made using that kind of spinning machine. Furthermore, it didn't use human power but water power. How could the power of a river be so tamed? Thinking back to what she had seen and heard tonight, she felt even more admiration for the mistress of the Yi family, who had long disappeared in the long river of history. Her gaze toward Fan Xian also burned a little hotter. Wasn't Fan Xian the son of the mistress of the Yi family? Fan Xian was not as shocked as she was. His initial sense of novelty had worn off. Although he still felt the joy of admiring his mother's legacy, the treasury of the Qing kingdom was probably not even as good as the village enterprises of his previous life. It was just some very basic things. If it were not for the Qing emperor's intelligence and how he kept a close eye on all the industries, they would probably not be as valuable as they were in the past. However, it was just shunned and they couldn't even produce refrigerators. How could Fan Xian be surprised? What he was surprised about was another matter. The treasurers of the palace treasury indeed lived extravagantly. His heart couldn't help but itch. If he swallowed the silver these people ate into his stomach, how much money would that be? As for the things that the eldest princess was worried about, he was not too worried. What bullsh *t technical monopoly? It wasn't a particularly difficult way to survive. Although he had not come from a science background, blowing a few glasses was not too much of a problem. Most importantly, he had people behind him. Knowledge was power. Knowledge was confidence. Knowledge was silver. This was the powerful understanding Fan Xian had developed on his first day in the palace treasury. To be continued. If you want to know what happened next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 350. The Qing National Treasury Transport Company was the most famous independent kingdom within its borders. Although the officials were all sent from Jingdo because they were far away in Jiangnan and there were too many temptations within, no matter what rank an official came from outside, in the end, they would all be assimilated by this enormous and alluring golden nest. Perhaps the officials of the Overwatch Council were better, but the officials within the transport company had long become one of the pillars of this independent kingdom. No one wanted any change to happen to the palace treasury. Even though the emperor had given an edict for the palace treasury to be transferred from the eldest princess of Xinjiang to Commissioner Fan, although these palace treasury officials had been the eldest princess' trusted aides for over a dozen years, they were not afraid of Fan Xian's arrival. They thought that as long as they did their superficial work well, presumably Sir Fan Jr. would not touch the foundation of the palace treasury. The trick of changing the emperor and changing the court officials would not play out. What was the foundation of the palace treasury? It was not the mountains of gold and silver, not the laboring workers, not the merchants on the outside, but the high-level craftsmen and treasurers of the 3 large workshops. The 3 large workshops of the palace treasury were spread across the various provinces of Jiangnan. The first workshop was responsible for producing glass products, handicrafts that required high precision, porcelain goods, extremely expensive perfume, famous spirits that had been steamed over and over again, and many more. Things like glass products could be expanded into countless products. In short, they could be called luxury goods producers. The second workshop was responsible for producing large amounts of cotton cloth, gauze, researching rice seeds, forging good steel, and major production. The combination of the first and second industries was mainly producing daily necessities. The third workshop was the most heavily guarded of the 3 workshops. It was responsible for producing ships and advanced military equipment that the military needed. For example, the lightweight repeating crossbows that the Black Knights were currently equipped with were provided by this workshop. Further away, the Third Bureau of the Overwatch Council and the Research Department of the Palace Treasury were still endlessly developing gunpowder. However, ever since the Yi family had opened the workshop, the development of gunpowder seemed to have gone down a wrong path. At present, the Overwatch Council could only use a cart of gunpowder as cannon and had not invented firearms. No one knew if it was because the people of the Qing kingdom were not smart enough or if that Yi woman had done something bad in the past. The 3 large workshops were just a rough description. There were countless related products scattered densely across North Min, producing goods endlessly. Then they were picked up by private merchants and distributed to northern Qi, Dongyi, small vassal states, and wild kingdoms beyond the ocean. They greedily and violently seized the money and food of the entire world. At the same time, they spread a better quality of life and more luxurious enjoyment to the entire world. After the Yi family was taken into the palace treasury, although the various industries were greatly impacted, their legacy remained. Furthermore, the various levels of treasurers had brought out a great deal of wisdom to bring the Yi family's industries to greater heights. This curve reached its peak 17 years ago. Of the entire Qing kingdom's financial income, 40% came from the palace treasury. It was only in recent years that this number had declined slightly. However, it was still the Qing kingdom's largest source of financial income. To borrow a common phrase from a certain world, the palace treasury was the engine of desire that pushed the Qing kingdom forward. It was precisely because the treasurers and unranked official had a very important effect on the palace treasury's production. Additionally, the eldest princess herself was a woman who traveled the world by scheming. She was not good at using a mountain-splitting knife to carry out management. Thus, over the years, all kinds of situations had overlapped and made the treasurers the most special group of officials in the Qing kingdom. The lowest level of workers in the palace treasury did not earn much money. Even the officials responsible for management were not very arrogant. Only the treasurers, other than a generous salary, enjoyed all kinds of allowances and various bonuses. It had to be said that this was the result of the eldest princess raising wolves with high salaries. It also had to do with the chaotic management of the court these years. In the Palace Treasury Transport Company, the treasurers were truly like local tyrants. Although they did not appear arrogant on the surface, they secretly took money, exploited workers, and scattered the money they obtained through the money houses on the periphery into the wilderness. They had already taken up a lot of land in the surrounding provinces. As for how many shameful methods they had used, no one knew. Additionally, these treasurers in the palace treasury bullied the lower-level workers and took advantage of men and women. The higher-ranking treasurers paid attention to their face, but the middle-ranked 30-year-old treasurers were naked and shameless. One of the treasurers Fan Xian found in the middle of the night had 12 concubines at home. As for how those 20-year-old concubines came about, who could say? They only knew that every year there would be workers making trouble. As for those who complained, they could not be counted. However, the palace treasury was special. Often, the victims of these complaints could not leave the palace treasury. Even if they were lucky enough to make it to Suzhou, they would always be fooled by the court. Offending good people was a small matter, but offending the treasurers was a big matter. This was the consensus of the Jiangnan Road officials. Thus, after the new head of the Palace Treasury Transport Company, the imperial envoy Fan Xian, arrived at the North Min Yamen, the lower-level workers and commoners who held a bone-deep hatred for the treasurers no longer beat the drums and cried out their grievances. Instead, they looked coldly at the door of the yamen. A glimmer of dark fire flashed through their eyes. The moment the fire appeared, the sound of firecrackers rang out and red confetti filled the air. The front door of the North Min Palace Treasury Transport Company yamen slowly opened. Dozens of officials dressed in formal robes filed in amidst the slightly smoky smell. They split into 2 rows and bowed respectfully to the young official in the middle. Fan Xian brought out the imperial edict, brought out the sword, showed his identity as the imperial envoy, and explained the rules of management. He looked at his subordinates below and pressed his hands together. Sit. Thank you for the seat. The officials of the palace treasury tidied up their clothing and sat down. There were not enough seats in the yamen, so some of the lower-level officials stood at the back. Everyone looked at the warm smile on Sir Fan Jr.'s face and felt slightly reassured. Furthermore, they did not see the Overwatch Council's wolf-like Jingdo officials. Their slightly wary minds immediately relaxed. Fan Xian narrowed his eyes and looked down. Very easily, he found his target among the crowd of officials. There were about 5 or 6 people. There were 3 people with dark complexions. They wore normal clothes with belts tied tightly around their waists. They sat there respectfully. It was clear that these 3 people did not have official positions, yet they sat among the crowd of officials. Furthermore, from their appearance, it was clear that they often went in and out of the workshops. It was a bit of an eyesore. Fan Xian's eyes were particularly sharp. He saw a glimmer of indifference and disdain toward him in their seemingly respectful and cautious manner. It was an expression of great confidence. He smiled slightly. Someone as calm and sinister as him would not be angered by the other party's expression. However, since the other party had been raised by the eldest princess for so many years, and he wanted to completely control the palace treasury, he had to knock them down a peg or two. He first put aside the three people and told the officials about the court's intentions. He then chatted a bit with the military representative sitting to his right. This military official was a distant relative of the Yi family. Although the Yi family seemed to have been forced to the second prince's side by the emperor, due to the existence of Yi Linger, the relationship between Fan Xian and the Yi family was still passable. Thus, the Yi family general was particularly respectful toward Fan Xian. Presumably, the family in the capital had given him some orders. After all the official matters had been said, Fan Xian suddenly quieted down. He raised his teacup and took a sip. The Qin kingdom did not have the custom of serving tea to send off guests. The officials knew that Sir Fan must have something important to say, so they all quieted down. Everyone already knew that Sir Fan Jr.'s inaugural speech in the bamboo sheds at the Suzhou docks beside the river had already shocked all of the Jiangnan road officials. They couldn't help but be curious about his words today. The palace treasury is truly a strange place, Fan Xian said with a smile. The officials also smiled along. The deputy added, "In the wilderness there is only knocking and banging. Although it is annoying, it is different." Fan Xian also smiled. "I thought the reason it was strange was because, on this trip south by imperial edict, every time I opened the yamen and revealed my identity, there would always be a local victim who would beat the drum and cry out their grievances, saying that the local officials had done many illegal things. I didn't expect that after opening the yamen for half a day in such a large place, there would not be a single commoner who would submit a petition." The officials paused and silently cursed. "You've been stealthily heading south, what kind of grievances are there?" But for Fan Xian to say this, there must be something else. They couldn't help but feel their hearts rise. Of course, Fan Xian's words were nonsense. It was just a prelude. "I am greatly gratified that under the governance of my colleagues, the palace treasury is clean and tidy. There is no illegal activity. It is truly rare." The officials' faces heated up. They repeatedly said they didn't dare to. Fan Xian's face did not darken. He only smiled and said, "But there is another question. I don't know if there is truly nothing wrong with the palace treasury or some officials have too much authority, so even if the commoners and workers have complaints in their hearts, they don't dare to say it to me?" These words were too careless. It was an undisguised attempt to frame someone for a crime. Regardless of faction, the officials were all local officials of the palace treasury. Their hearts froze and a glimmer of disgust grew in them. They thought, even if you want to burn 3 fires, you can't use such an absurd method. With the deputy in the lead, the officials all stepped out and said in a loud voice, "Sir, there is no such thing, there is no such thing." Fan Xian lowered his head. His fingers gently rubbed the cuffs Cece had just sewn and asked, "There is no such thing?" "I heard that these years the 3 large workshops owe their workers a great deal of wages. Last year there was even a major incident. Is there such a thing?" The officials paused. Last year, because the treasurers had exploited them too harshly, the workers of the 3 large workshops had indeed caused a commotion and 2 people had died. This matter had long been hidden by the officials of the transport company. Unexpectedly, the news had traveled to Jingdo. Since Sir Fan had already said it, then he must have received accurate information. It would be difficult to hide it. The deputy quickly went forward and smiled apologetically. Before the year, the return of funds was a bit slow. The wages were only paid 3 days late. In the end, those unruly people took the opportunity to cause trouble and caused the 3 large workshops to stop work for a day. It brought irreparable damage to the court. Thus, after the transport company discussed it, we asked General Yi to suppress it. Fortunately, not too many lives were lost. Thinking that it was close to the end of the year and you would be arriving soon, there was no rush to report it. In reality, it was not that the wages had been paid late. More accurately, it was that the treasurers had taken too much of the wages they had given out. Under the accumulated anger, the public's anger gradually rose, and the workers began to make trouble. The officials of the transport company did not want to offend the treasurers, nor did they want to take out public silver to make up for the debt. Thus they pretended to be deaf and dumb. Only when the matter grew did they mobilize troops to suppress it. Fan Xian turned around and quietly said a few words to General Yi. The general's face revealed an awkward expression and quietly responded. Presumably the role he played in this matter was not honorable. Fan Xian furrowed his brows and gently knocked on the table beside him. Everyone, to put it bluntly, this palace treasury is a business. However, it is the emperor's business and the Qing court's business. Since it does business, then the most important thing is the people who do it. Year after year, delaying the workers' wages. Who would be willing to work for you? Even if they did work, how could they be willing to put their heart into it? In the end, isn't it still the court that loses out? The officials repeatedly voiced their agreement. They all said that in the future, they would strictly follow the rules of the palace treasury and that there would be no more delaying of wages. As for what would happen in the future, that was for the treasurers to deal with Sir Fan Jr. These officials only hoped to quickly deceive the scene in front of them. However, the expressions of the three dark-skinned figures sitting in the chairs without official robes became somewhat ugly. Just talking nonsense. Fan Xian shook his head and sighed. Naturally, we won't be delaying in the future. Then what about those we owed in the past? The main hall of the yamen immediately sank into a death-like silence. In their fear, the officials did not say anything more. There were tens of thousands of palace treasury workers. Adding on food, lodging, water, clothing, and a series of other logistics, the number of people reached a terrifying level. The court set generous wages for the workers of the three workshops. Drawing water from them had become one of the biggest sources of wealth for the palace treasury officials. If Fan Xian really wanted these officials to spit out all of the deductions from the past few years, it would be a large sum. These officials knew in their hearts that they were hindered by the Qing law and the Overwatch Council's investigation, so they never dared to eat openly. It was only a small gift from the treasurers after they had eaten. Sir Fan was probably targeting those treasurers. Thus, the gazes of the officials swept, intentionally or unintentionally, across the three of them. It was as if Fan Xian did not sense the turbulence in the dark. In an even voice he said, "The court cannot owe its people. The debts from the past few years will have to be gradually made up. However, the matter is complicated and cannot be rushed." Cannot be rushed. The hearts of the officials once again relaxed, but they were greatly frightened by what he said next. 3 days. Fan Xian smiled slightly and extended 3 fingers. Gazing at the officials, he said, "I give you all 3 days to fill in all of the debts for me. Make up all of the wages owed to the workers below. Remember, use the interest from Taiping Money House as the basis. After 3 days, if there are still workers who come to me and say they have not received their wages," Fan Xian said. Fan Xian said, "Or perhaps my subordinates in the Overwatch Council have found out. Sorry everyone, I will have to show some ruthlessness." Although he was smiling, the officials could already feel a chill beginning to spread around them. The 3 brothers who had been sitting calmly finally could not sit still. With humble expressions they stood up and said, "Sir, I have something to report." "Speak." Fan Xian glanced at him with great interest. "There may be cases of delayed wages, but the amount is not large. Furthermore, it is often because the accounts are not going smoothly." The person chuckled. "Sir, you have come from far away in Jingdo. Perhaps you do not know how powerful the unruly people in these places are. Those people bring their families to work. It is clearly one person working in the workshop, but he has to report 3 people. It is not that we have delayed wages, it is that they want to swindle the court of silver." "Oh." Fan Xian made a sound of surprise. "There is such a trick." "Yes." The person clearly did not see the sarcasm in Fan Xian's words. Overjoyed, he said, "Sir, those workers are sly and cunning. Relying on the fact that the court cares for the people, they dare to make exorbitant demands. If there are any demands that cannot be met, they will slack off. There are even worse fellows who dare to tamper with the process. These years, who knows how much silver the court has lost." This person poured dirty water on the workers. No matter how good Commissioner Fan's reputation was, he was still an official. How could he sit on the side of the workers? As the saying goes, one's position determines one's position. There was no need to worry about not standing on the side of the workers. Fan Xian laughed coldly in his heart. These words pushed all of his frequent crimes onto the workers. But his expression was not happy. He sighed. "Ah, I did not expect the emperor to be so benevolent, and yet these people are still so unsatisfied." The person smiled apologetically. "It is indeed so. When I return, I will investigate the matter of delayed wages. But those workers who have caused trouble cannot be easily forgiven. Sir, do not be fooled by the words of these scoundrels. Those people are sly and cunning, and they are truly not good people." Fan Xian looked at this person and suddenly furrowed his brows. "May I ask who you are?" At the side, the deputy quickly made an introduction. "This is the master of the first workshop, Sir Xiao." "Sir Xiao." Fan Xian seemed a little surprised. Master of the first workshop? The head of the treasurers? The master of the 3 workshops, surnamed Xiao, quickly bowed. That is me. Fan Xian stared at him for a moment and suddenly opened his mouth. You are a mere master, nothing more than a little treasurer. The court has given you an unranked rank. You don't even have an official position. How dare you call yourself a lowly official in front of me? Everyone was startled. His voice suddenly became cold. You keep calling yourself a lowly official. What kind of official are you? This is the first time the yamen has opened its doors. You, a mere master, are not waiting outside to be summoned. Instead, you dare to barge into the hall and sit among the court officials. How dare you? Dare I ask, what kind of bastard and daring thing are you? The hall was silent for a long time. It was not until a long time later that the officials heard clearly that Sir Fan was cursing. Immediately, the hall exploded with a roar. How could this be? Ever since the palace treasury had been returned to the royal family, this was the first time someone had pointed at the faces of the masters of the 3 workshops and cursed. Even the eldest princess, who had come to the North Min Yamen for the first time after taking over the palace treasury, was very gentle toward the 3 masters of the 3 workshops. How could Sir Fan dare to curse them? The master of the first workshop, Sir Xiao, was also stunned. He had not thought that even if Sir Fan did not want to win him over, he would not give him face and curse him so fiercely. He gave a muffled grunt and his expression immediately became ugly. However, facing a proper prince, he did not dare to say anything. He resentfully raised his hands in a salute and returned to his seat to be a quiet bodhisattva. Remove his seat. Fan Xian narrowed his eyes and furrowed his brows into a beautiful little circle. In an even voice he said, There is no seat for him in front of me. Sir Fan. The master flew into a rage. Before his buttocks had even touched the seat, he straightened his body again. Forcefully suppressing the anger in his heart, he said, Don't go too far. Fan Xian completely ignored this person. He drank his tea and chatted with the awkward-looking General Yi and the deputy beside him. As they spoke, the Overwatch Council officials beside him had already gone down. They pushed Sir Xiao to the side and removed his seat. Thus the matter became serious. Not only did the officials below all come out to plead for leniency, even General Yi lowered his voice and said by Fan Xian's ear, Young Master Fan, leave them some face. Leave them some face? Fan Xian smiled and said, Today I have come especially to rip their faces off. General Yi was stupefied and didn't continue to speak. Ever since the opening of the palace treasury yamen, the masters of the 3 workshops all had their own seats in the yamen. Their positions were special, and no one had ever humiliated their existence like this. Seeing the master of the first workshop being humiliated, the other 2 masters of the 3rd workshop could no longer sit still. They rose to stand beside Sir Xiao and said to Fan Xian in a cold voice, Since you think there is no place for us in the yamen, why don't we remove it together? In any case, the 3 workshops are nothing more than lowly people. They were not acting out of spite. They were using the 3 workshops to pressure others. Fan Xian raised his head and looked at the 3 masters standing in a row in front of him. He smiled slightly and said, Of course we will remove it together. Do you think there will still be a place for you? Of course, the 3 workshops are not all lowly people, but since you have all admitted it, I will believe you. Sir. The masters of the 3 workshops had not expected Fan Xian to press forward step by step. His words did not leave any room for retreat. Only now did they know that he was not only trying to establish his might, he was trying to kill them all. But, what confidence did Fan Xian have? Did he really want to see the 3 workshops collapse? The tone of the masters of the 3 workshops once again became ruthless. Sir, how have the 3 workshops offended you? Exploiting wages, bullying men and women, using skills to threaten the court, disrespecting me, of course. Fan Xian stared at the 3 of them and said, You have not offended me. You have offended the workers in the 3 workshops, as well as the court and the people who support you. If you wish to incriminate someone, you can always find a pretext, the 3 masters said angrily. The 3 masters said angrily, Sir, you have just come to the transport company, yet you act so recklessly. Does the Qing court really not have any rules? Rules? I am the rules, Fan Xian thought with a smile. Of course he didn't say these words out loud. He just remembered that when Second Fan had run amok in Jingdo, his favorite thing to say was these ruthless words. It looked like being an official was the same as being a thug. When encountering a chaotic situation where the situation was unclear, it was always possible to use some brutal techniques. Someone, these 3 people are making a ruckus in the hall. Drag them out and give them 10 strokes of the paddle first. Fan Xian gently placed the teacup in his hand on the table and ignored the pleading words of the officials below. He smiled and thought that he was suffering and tyrannical, but he was impatient. How could he waste his breath on these people? You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.